Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the fourth part of What If Deku and Others React to For Want of a Nail. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Now playing Shadows. The horror movie heroes team up. Hitoshi reapplied the bandages from a few days ago, even though the cuts were almost healed by now. His bullies had laid off him for the moment, too scared that his mysterious backup would pop out of the shadows at any moment. Hitoshi knew better than to expect that to last forever, especially once they figured out that the guy they were so afraid of was actually just a quirkless kid from another school who had his own bullies to worry about. Still, the break was nice while it lasted. Fear is a wonderful status effect. Shigaraki comments. Funny as hell too. Dabi agrees. Hitoshi stretched and climbed into bed to browse his phone until he felt tired enough to sleep. His foster parents didn't really care what he did when he had insomnia as long as he was quiet and didn't leave his room. But then again, the quiet rule had been pretty much constant since he turned 4, so it wasn't that bad. At least he didn't have to worry about sharing a room, even if it stung a little that the other kids would rather let him have the attic to himself rather than share a room with the villain. When we get back, we should invite him over for movie night and such. Yamamo suggests. He intends to transfer to the hero course if I remember correctly. Ida considers it would improve group cohesion in the event that he joins a class as opposed to B. He agrees. Once his current fosters realized a roommate wasn't going to work, they cleaned out the tiny space above the garage and shoved him there to make room for the other kids. Half the walls were bare plywood and it was miserably hot in the summer, but Hitoshi couldn't complain. At least he had a window in the roof so he could watch the stars when he inevitably got bored with his phone. It was cloudy tonight, but he glanced up anyway to see what constellations were out, then promptly scrambled out of bed, barely stifling a scream as he glimpsed a shadow, a human-shaped shadow, peering through his window. Hitoshi was half convinced he'd imagined it, until the shadow knocked. Izuku sputters. I didn't. Hitoshi seriously considered just making a run for his life. Never mind what his foster parents would say before stealing his courage and reaching for his phone. He turned on the flashlight and shone it toward the window. It was probably nothing, right? Just a raccoon or maybe a tree branch, even though there weren't any trees near his window. Still, there was no point in getting in trouble for a false alarm. The fact that the boy is afraid of reporting a possible intruder is rather telling. Ectoplasm remarks. Another thing to look into upon our return. Nezu taps his pen to his chin. With all we will have by the end of this, I'll need to assign each teacher to something different. Possibly multiple cases per teacher. You can count on us heroes for backup since we're here seeing it anyway. Fox offers. Even if you don't end up calling us, and you better keep us in the loop. Maruko demands. I know I won't be able to rest well without knowing something. Mr. Brave agrees. Nezu chuckles to himself before replying, but of course. When he saw that it was the kid from the alley, Hitoshi could only blink in bewilderment. The kid gave him a bright smile as he waved. Through his window. On his roof. Dude, what? Zero says confused. There's a reason I call those things Deku Stalker notebooks. Bakugo huffs. What the? Hitoshi breathed. Moat. Our own Hitoshi says. Hi Shinso. The kid's voice was slightly muffled through the glass. Let me in. Hitoshi's curiosity won out over his intelligence, and before he knew it, he'd reached out and unlatched the window. The kid tumbled onto his bed with a quiet thump and ruffled his curls, which did absolutely nothing to make them more presentable, before looking up. Thanks, I'm Izuku Midoriya. By the way, I don't think I ever got around to mentioning that the other day. No you didn't, but that's hardly the point right now. Jiro snarks with a laugh. I thought I told you to go away. Hitoshi said blankly. Oh, you did? Midoriya nodded agreeably. You have a really cool quirk. By the way, you're going to be able to do so many awesome things with it, so why are you here? Hitoshi could feel a migraine coming on. Actually, back up. How are you here? I didn't even tell you my name. I have my ways. Izuku deadpans, leading Ochako, Mei, and Tsu to snort while Ida sighs and Todoroki smirks. Well, Midoriya looked almost embarrassed. I actually started with your uniform? My uniform. Hitoshi did a double take. Wait, started? Midoriya nodded. Well, I know there are a lot of schools that use the same uniform, so I looked at what time they ended and crossed off the ones that weren't within walking distance of where we met. Then I scanned through the websites of the ones left, because at least at my school the bullies are the ones with the strongest quirks and end up getting featured a lot, so I figured I might be able to find one of yours. Once I'd found your school, I dug a little deeper and figured out it's your last year too, but I couldn't find what class you were in or what your name was, so I just kinda asked around about a kid with a verbal activation quirk, threw out 90% of the rumors, figured out what your name was, and used that to find you. Good thing UA isn't letting the students help find us. Dabi remarks. Shut up, You idiot, Shigaraki scolds. Don't give them any ideas. Hitoshi stared at Midoriya, who was looking at him expectantly. That skinned a creepy. To his surprise, Midoriya grinned. I know, isn't it great? What the hell? Is he okay? My brain hurts. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. Oh, okay, well, not traditionally, but... Midoriya bit his lip. You want to be a hero, right? Hitoshi nodded hesitantly. I'm going to go to UA. Are you here to stop me? No. Midoriya clapped a hand over his mouth as he realized how loud he'd been. No, I actually want to be a hero too, so I was kinda hoping we could help each other? And maybe be like hero partners? Because, oh well. Hitoshi gestured for him to continue. Because what? Because you think hanging around the villain will make you less of a target? Diamond Kid let him finish. Dabi huffs. No. Midoriya puffed his cheeks out in frustration. It's just, let's face it, neither of us is ever going to be the kind of hero that brings people hope. Kids like us can't be heroes like All Might. Maybe you can't. Hitoshi snarled. But I'm gonna prove them all wrong and be. Midoriya waved his hands frantically. No, we can't be heroes like All Might, but we can be different. You've seen how much prejudice there is. You've got a villain quirk, Shinso, and I'm quirkless. Even if a few of the more open-minded civilians decide to trust us, there's still going to be a lot of people who are never going to be willing to see past our quirks. A harsh reality indeed. Tokoyami grumbles. Hitoshi huffed. Ouch, okay. Great pep talk. Real inspiring. Snort, he's got you there. Moat. Let me finish. Midoriya said. We might not be the kind of heroes that can make civilians think, oh, thank God we're saved, when we arrive at the scene. So what if instead we become the kind of heroes that make villains think, oh, FCK, we're screwed? Midoriya's expression had morphed into a sly smile, but Hitoshi hung back. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm saying that we don't have to bring hope if we can weaponize fear. People are already afraid of you, Midoriya said. And they're either freaked out by me or think I'm weak. I think we can use that to our advantage. We're never going to be very popular, but we can still save people. Holy shit, oh no. Those poor villains. Hitoshi was silent for a long moment. You're insane. Midoriya's face fell, but Hitoshi was too busy thinking through everything he'd just heard to comfort him. Fear tactics were normally associated with villains, but so was brainwashing. Not to mention that fear had been just enough to keep his bullies off his back for a few days. So yeah, Midoriya's idea was crazy, but oddly enough, it was so crazy it just might work. Plus, it wasn't like he had literally anything else going for him. Okay, sure, I'm down. Let's do it. Hitoshi said finally, making Midoriya do a double take. But that still doesn't explain what you're doing in my house in the middle of the night. Do you know how much trouble I could get in if my foster parents caught you? I was going to wait until tomorrow and find you after school, Midoriya insisted, blushing. But he got too excited. He at least had the good grace to look sheepish, and in spite of himself, Hitoshi smiled and shook his head. Yep, you're insane. Midoriya grinned hesitantly. I guess I'll take that as a compliment. Sho, stop grinning, you're scaring me. Mike begs. Never. Aizawa deadpants. Meanwhile, let's invite the purple boy over. May suggests. I'm game. Uraraka comments. I've no issue with it. Todoroki nods. Might as well. Tsu agrees. Shinsuke Izuku gets his attention. Come sit with us if that's agreeable. Ida adds. What? Shinso replies. Because I've already adopted you in one story and you're Izuku's hero partner in another. May reasons. Shinso sighs. Whatever. He answers as he moves to join the group. Okay, Headcase calls out the next chapter is starting. Now playing Deku? I think he's some pro. What else do you need? Deku, I have something for you. Izuku looked up from where he was looking over the analyses for the villains they would be fighting tomorrow night to see Eraser standing in the doorway, holding a silver metal case. He walked over and set the case on the desk Izuku was working at. His costume Ishido and Kaminari cheer. Normally we wouldn't give you this until after school started, Eraser shrugged, but I think you'll agree that almost nothing about this situation is normal, so we rushed the order. Izuku looked between Eraser and the case in confusion. Eraser rolled his eyes and gestured for him to open it. Izuku hesitantly complied and sucked in a breath when he saw what was inside. It was his hero costume. It consisted of a sleeveless dark green bodysuit with black panels running down the length of the suit on both sides and an open collar. It had knee-high dark red boots with black armored sections on the thighs and toes. The fingerless gloves went all the way up to just above his elbows. They were the same dark red as his boots, but the black armored sections were on his forearms so he could block attacks easier. They also had black knuckle dusters built in to give more power to Izuku's punches. The utility belt for his smoke bombs and flash grenades was black and red, while the knife holsters on his hips were all plain black. He had a holster on his right thigh that held a spring-loaded grappling hook similar to the one he'd borrowed from Yaoyorozu during the entrance exam. There were empty holsters on each thigh and a green face mask with a black and red geometric pattern that made Izuku look at Eraser questioningly. Deku, that's so cool. Uraraka squeals, shaking him by the shoulder. The extra holsters will be for your guns once you're licensed, Eraser responded, and the mask is sound cancelling with a mic on the inside. When you're wearing it, we'll be able to hear you through the comms, but anyone outside the comm system won't be able to. This way you can murmur as much as you need to without alerting enemies to your position. There's a button on the side that will turn that feature off in case you need to talk to civilians. That is cool. Izuku insists. Izuku nodded. That's smart. I had a few problems with that on previous internships, so that'll be good. He looked at Eraser hopefully. Can I put it on? Eraser gave him a look. I wouldn't have given it to you if you couldn't, problem child. You need to get used to the feel of it before the mission anyway. Meet me in the gym when you're done and we'll spar. Izuku nodded and got dressed once Aizawa left. He took a minute to look at himself in the mirror and smiles behind the mask. He looked like a hero. He's so manly. Kirishima tears up while Bakugo rolls his eyes. Shoyuta hid a proud smile in his capture weapon when Deku walked into the gym in full costume. The kid really looked intimidating, decked out in dark colors with weapons strapped all over him, and Shoyuta felt a brief flash of pity for all the villains whose first meeting with him would be in a dark alley. Oh shivers. Toga giggles. Without any warning, Shoyuta grabbed his capture weapon and ran forward. Deku's eyes widened slightly as he brought his arms in front of him to block a kick, then grabbed the capture weapon and wrapped it around his forearm, using it to pull Shoyuta closer. He threw a punch at Shuta's gut but hadn't let go of the capture weapon, so Shoyuta dodged the punch and yanked strong, making Deku stumble and creating an opening for Shoyuta to throw him over his shoulder. Well, that was badass. Jiro smirks. Good, Shoyuta said, you're moving pretty well. Is the costume causing any problems or impeding your movements in any way? Deku shook his head and waited for a moment, then his eyes widened and he pressed the button on the side of his mask. You forgot. Izuku mumbles, blushing. I forget you couldn't hear me without comms. He laughed. No, the extra weight on my feet and hands will take some getting used to, but nothing is chafing or digging anywhere, so I think that's good, right? Shoyuta nodded. All right, let's go again and get you used to the extra weight when you're fighting. They spent the next few hours sparring, and by the end of it, Deku was moving as easily in his costume as he could move without it and had gotten a feel for how to grab all his weapons. After that, they spent most of the rest of the day experimenting with the grappling hook so Deku wouldn't accidentally die if he had to use it. Sports training montage. Kaminari sings quietly. This is going to be so cool to use in the middle of a fight, not just to get around. Deku rambled once they'd finished. I could probably use it to fly at opponents and increase the speed and power of my punches and kicks. I wonder if there could be a way to control the velocity? I'll have to look at the design and maybe talk to the support department when I get to UA. So many ideas made. Cheers. You can worry about incorporating the grappling hook into your fighting style after school starts. Shoyuta interrupted. For tomorrow, just use it as a mobility aid. Deku nodded with determination, then looked up at Shoyuta. Thank you. By the way. Shoyuta raised his eyebrow. For what? Making sure you don't die? Snort, cough, huff. Deku fiddled with his hands. I mean that too, but thank you for helping me be a hero. And for being my friend. I was pretty depressed before Anne, and then you guys reached out and basically rekindled my dream. Even if it was just that, it'd be more than enough, but then you guys actively took me under your wing and helped train me. Thanks. Shoyuta looked at Deku softly and ruffled his hair. Go get dressed, problem child. You need to get a good night's sleep, and I'm sure you're exhausted after today. Deku gave him a bright smile, and he knew the kid had seen straight through his apathetic exterior. He watched Deku leave to go to the locker rooms, and Shoyuta couldn't help but feel grateful that the problem child had weaseled his way into his life. Midnight coos teasingly. Eraser just sighs. Izuku's whole body was buzzing with nervous energy. The past few months had been beyond his wildest dreams. Okay, well, not really. His wildest dreams involved him spontaneously developing a quirk and going on to become the world's greatest hero, even better than Kakin. But those dreams were in the same vein as fantasy novels in that Izuku knew they were unrealistic and would never have the possibility of actually happening. Well, except if All Might had chosen him to receive his quirk apparently, but he was still kinda reeling from that discovery. Haha about that. Izuku huffs. Uraraka snickers while Ida pats him on the back. Izuku shook his head. Reality was much better than his dreams anyway. He was on track to become the first quirkless hero. He'd gotten into UA, he'd learned to use weapons. And he even had a hero costume. Everything was falling into place, and Izuku was the happiest he'd been since the doctor had told him to give up on his dreams when he was 4 years old. I want that man's license. Aizawa growls. Indeed. Netsu agrees. But no matter how strong he tried, Izuku still couldn't help but feel like Eraser and the others would wake up one day and realize that he wasn't worth it. They kept telling him that he was skilled and would be an amazing hero, but they had to be wrong. Izuku was nothing, a nobody, just a pebble on the side of the road in someone else's story. All this luck and success was just setting him up for devastating disappointment when his heroes inevitably realized how useless he actually was. Oh no, he's spiraling, Kaminari shouts in concern. Izuku stilled as an even worse idea occurred to him. What if this was all just a practical joke? What if Kakin and the others had somehow impressed Eraser and the others and they were all laughing behind his back as they built up his dream only to take it away at the last minute? What if they were just pretending to be his friends even though they really hated him and were well aware of how useless he really was? He's reaching HeadcaseKiller cries. He distantly realized that his brain was too tired to work correctly and was jumping to conclusions that wouldn't make any sense if he'd slept properly, but at the moment that was just a simple observation 2 steps removed from reality. The hypothetical betrayal felt all too real as tears began to leak from Izuku's eyes and soak the pillow as he struggled to breathe in the dark of his room. Why would they do this to him? He really was worthless if he couldn't see through such an obvious ruse to begin with. Why did he ever think anyone would actually want to be friends with him? No, they like you. They believe in you. Just like we do. Yamamoto assures. Izuku didn't notice that his sobs had gotten louder until someone came into his room and turned on the light. He shoved a hand over his mouth to try to contain the sound. He really was hopeless, wasn't he? Now he'd woken someone else up with his stupid crying and he was being such a bother, and why? Why was he so useless? He felt the bed dip as another person came and sat down beside him and a hand gently carded through his hair. Izuku-sensei's got him. Ajiru calms HeadcaseKiller. Deku? Eraser's voice was soft and full of concern, but Izuku couldn't help but wonder how much of that was faked. Hey kid, what's wrong? Izuku let out another sob and Eraser pulled him up and into a hug. Izuku clung to him on instinct as he started babbling incoherently, and Eraser whispered comfort as he continued running a hand through his hair. And you say you aren't good with kids? Mike grins proudly while rubbing his friend's shoulders. No, we're not gonna leave you, kid. He said softly. We really do care about you. I don't know where you got the idea that this is all a joke or if that's even what you're saying, but it isn't. We would never do that to you. We would never betray you, Deku. Okay. I don't like that the screen blurs when he can't see through his tears. Shigaraki complains. Eventually, the reassurances managed to make their way into Izuku's anxiety-addled brain, and his sobs gradually reduced themselves to sniffles. Now, with the lights on and Eraser beside him in ridiculous cat-printed pajamas, his thought process made a lot less sense. He giggled and Eraser raised one eyebrow. Snort, oh my god, cough, what is he wearing? Cackle, kill me now. Whiz, what's so funny, problem child? Izuku giggled again and gestured helplessly to Eraser's pajamas. Eraser looked down at his outfit like he'd forgotten what he was wearing and sighed. If you tell joke about this, I will personally make sure they never find your body. Too late, joke cackles. Izuku hiccuped, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. They have kittens on them, yes, they do. Dabi chuckles condescendingly. Eraser rolled his eyes, yes, they do. And unless you would like me to buy you a pair to match, I would advise you shut up about them. Izuku was foolin' laughing now. Eraserhead, this big bad serious hero, sleeps in kitten pajamas. Eraser scoffed. I can have kitten pajamas if I want, problem child. Midnight is losing her mind, Shoyuta. Izuku stared at him with wide eyes. Do any of your friends know? Eraser glared at him. Again, if you tell anyone, Deku, they will never find your body. I have a reputation to maintain. Not after this. Aizawa shakes his head in defeat. Izuku smiled. That would be perfect merch. Imagine going to a hero convention and there's a booth just selling Eraserhead brand kitten pajamas. No. Eraser deadpants. Eraser groaned and shook his head. That would be a nightmare. No, never. That is not happening. He sighed and looked at Izuku. Are you feeling any better? Izuku stilled. He'd almost forgotten why Eraser was sitting on his bed in his ridiculous pajamas. After a long moment he nodded. I guess I don't know what came over me. I still feel like I don't deserve you guys sometimes. Well, most of the time, actually. I guess it only makes sense when your brain isn't working quite right. Late night spirals are typical. Izuku nods. There's nothing to distract you from it. Shinso muses. And then that of course causes nightmares. Todoroki agrees. I think it's best to inform each other of such nights. Ida suggests yeah, definitely. Anytime. The girls chime in. Eraser nodded. I get it. You've been told your whole life that no one would ever care about you except your mom, and that attitude isn't going to go away overnight. He leaned back so he could look Izuku in the eyes. But just know that we really are here for you. Not because we have to be, but because we genuinely like you. I know just words aren't enough, but I hope someday you'll be able to see how important you are to us, okay Deku? What he said. Su agrees, leaning against Izuku, bringing a smile to his face. Izuku nodded. The anxious thoughts still clung to the back of his mind like a stubborn piece of sludge, but he could see past them now at least. He took a deep breath and smiled. Thanks, Eraser. I think I'm okay now. I think we'd better try to sleep though. Tomorrow's gonna be a long day. Eraser nodded and ruffled Izuku's hair one last time before he stood up. Good night, Deku. Don't be afraid to wake me up if you need anything. Izuku nodded. Alright, I'll let you know if I desperately need to take a picture of your pajamas. To send to the group chat. Problem child. Aizawa warns. It wasn't me. Izuku tsutskless. Eraser paused at the door and looked incredulously at Izuku, who was grinning widely. After a long moment he scoffed and rolled his eyes. Good night, problem child. He said fondly. Good night, Eraser. Izuku buried himself deep in his blankets as Eraser turned off the light and closed the door. He was asleep long before his anxiety could take over again. The heroes and students attempt to chat about the upcoming raid but are interrupted by the villains chanting, Mastermind, 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 until the next chapter begins. Now playing Mastermind. Strategist for hire. Shoulda. Why is my name the title? Todoroki demands. Headcase just smirks. Watch and see. She says, setting many on edge. Hello everyone and welcome to the sports festival. Can I get a plus ultra? Present. Mixed booming voice could be heard even from the sidewalk outside the stadium, and Izuku shook his head. Heroes. The hell is he doing there? Mike shouts with worry. Honestly, Izuku didn't know why they were still holding the festival this year after All Might had been killed on school grounds, but the principal had held a press conference a few days after the funeral announcing that it would continue as planned. Something about how with the symbol of peace gone, it fell to the rising generation to bring hope to the world or something like that. Well, at least Izuku could get some good intel on the quirks he'd be facing in a few years. He wished he'd had that info before the USJ attack, but oh well, better late than never. This is why we shouldn't broadcast the sports festival. Aizawa groans. He walked past dozens of pro heroes as he went through the heightened security, but no one gave a kid in a t-shirt and jeans a second glance. He smiled and found his seat. Mastermind was here in their midst and the heroes would never know. This is fun. Dabi smirks. His mom had been so excited when he told her a friend of his had won tickets and invited him to go. They'd never had the money to afford it before, but Izuku hadn't had a shortage of cash since he'd become a villain. Too bad his mom didn't know about his secret funds, hence the cover story. He wished he could have brought Himiko, but a suspected serial killer couldn't exactly sneak past security. That would be a problem. Shinso drawls. Alright, let's welcome in the students who faced a villain attack and survived. The same students that All Might gave his life for Class 1AO. That's so much worse than just surviving those villains. Momo winces. They'll never live this down. Jiro frowns. The stadium erupted into cheers and Izuku watched as the familiar students strode into the stadium. They looked vaguely uncomfortable. They probably didn't like the reminder of watching the number one hero die. It must have been traumatic. Izuku squashed the feelings of guilt that tried to choke him. They were heroes. They had been given everything in life just because of their quirks, while Izuku's life had been nothing but trauma. They deserved a little trauma after what they had put him through. Watching All Might die in front of them was just payback. He's justifying to himself. Izuku sighs. These little glimpses of you and him make this just that little bit more real. Uraraka says sadly. He was excited to see what the purple-haired student's quirk actually was. He figured it was a verbal response triggered, considering his defiant behavior at the USJ, but the question remained of whether it put someone to sleep like Midnight's quirk, or was somehow more involved. He was also excited about the half-and-half boy's quirk since he was one of the few who managed to fight back during the attack. And against the Nomu too. Izuku smiled darkly as he watched Katsuki climb the steps to give the opening speech. There was always the possibility that Katsuki would be injured in one of his matches, but Izuku knew he shouldn't get his hopes up. FCKU 2. Bakugo Huffs. I just want to say All Might was an amazing hero. We owe it to him to give it our all, and that's why I'm gonna win this thing. That might be the most touching thing that boy has ever said. All Might mentions. That's just sad. Midnight sighs. Izuku rolled his eyes as the other students booed. Of course, Katsuki would manage to compliment All Might and insult his competitors all in one breath. His old bully would never change, would he? Depends on the world apparently. Ajaru murmurs. The first round was interesting but not surprising. It was a surprise to learn that the half-and-half boy was Todoroki Shuto, the son of Endeavor. He managed to freeze most of the competition and narrowly beat out Katsuki as the winner of the round. Damn it. Bakugo grumbles. Izuku leaned forward as he watched Todoroki glare blankly at the crowd as Katsuki lost it. His coloring was very distinct and he only ever created ice from his right side, so could he do it from his left? Izuku pulled out a notebook and began to write down his thoughts. It wouldn't surprise him at all if Todoroki had some kind of hybrid quirk, unfair but not unheard of. Maybe he could create ice from the right side of his body, the white-haired side, and fire from his left? If that was the case, then why hadn't he shown off his fire side yet? It would have made much more sense to melt through the robots or use the fire to propel himself as Katsuki did, but Todoroki only used his ice. Interesting. I don't like other use interest in me, Todoroki mentions. Neither do I. Izuku agrees. The next round gave Izuku a good chance to evaluate the purple-haired boy's quirk. He was named Shinso, at least according to the scoreboard. Izuku watched as he took advantage of the other teams as they targeted Todoroki. He would approach them as if he wanted to team up, but then the other team would simply hand over their points without a fight. So some sort of brainwashing, not just putting them in a daze. Izuku wondered how complicated the commands could be. It was a useful quirk, shame it had to go to a hero. FCKU 2. Shinso sneers. In the end, Todoroki, Katsuki, and Shinso all moved on, as well as another team comprised mostly of Class 1A members, plus a support student. And still, Todoroki didn't use his fire. Izuku knew he had it now. He'd seen it ignite briefly once when Katsuki had gotten too close, but Todoroki had looked angry and extinguished it almost immediately. His mastery of his ice was amazing, but Izuku couldn't help but wonder how powerful he could be if he stopped ignoring his left side. At least you don't have that problem anymore, Todoroki-kun. Uraraka grins at the boy. It wasn't easy, Todoroki admits. He put his notebook away, stretched, and headed for the student areas. He never had been very good at ignoring his curiosity, had he? Sneaking past the guards was almost too easy, even if they were pro-heroes, and Izuku walked confidently as he searched for Todoroki. If he was caught, he could just say he was looking for Kaken, and that they were old friends. Sneaking backstage to see him and wish him luck was something the old Izuku would have done, no question. I hate that he isn't wrong. Bakugo growls. You're a disgrace, Shudo. Izuku ducked behind a wall as he heard Endeavor's voice. There wouldn't even be a question of your position if you would just use the fire I gave you. This won't end well. Endeavor grumbles. I will never use your fire. Todoroki's voice was tight with anger. I will make it to the top, but I will do it without your quirk. Seriously? Shoto. I indulged you when you were younger, but it's time you give up this childish tantrum. Even from his place around the corner, Izuku could see his breath as the temperature dropped. It's time for you to go, father. The tournament will be starting soon. Izuku flattened himself against the wall as Endeavor stalked past him, radiating heat. The hero didn't even glance his way, just disappeared down the hall. Izuku waited a moment before turning the corner. It might not be the best timing, but he didn't want to lose his chance to talk to Todoroki. Leave him alone, go away, don't you touch him. Shudo's eyes widened slightly as a short boy with green hair, obviously a civilian, came into view. This area was supposed to be off-limits for spectators. Endeavor had gotten past security by virtue of being the new #1 hero, but this was just a normal kid, so how did he get back here? Was he a threat? Shudo relaxed slightly when the kid gave him a brilliant smile. Anyone who could smile like that couldn't be dangerous. And that's where you're wrong. Shoji remarks. Hello, Todoroki? The boy asked nervously. Shudo nodded and the boy smiled. You're doing really well so far. Your skills are amazing. I especially loved how you beat out Katsuki in the last 2 rounds. Shudo raised one eyebrow. Katsuki? The boy's expression soured slightly. Interesting. Katsuki Bakugo. We've known each other since we were kids. He smiled again. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Shudo nodded. Why are you back here? Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck. I actually have a question for you. You're obviously pretty powerful with just your ice, but you have a fire quirk as well, right? Why don't you use it? Oh. Both Todoroki and Midoriya say in unison. Shudo scowled and turned away. My father put you up to this, didn't he? Midoriya grabbed his arm. He was stronger than he looked. No, I was just curious and I wanted to know because I thought it was interesting. Not that I'm going to try to force you to use your fire, I was just wondering. And he trailed off and stood there awkwardly. Shudo didn't know if it was just one thing, but for some reason he felt like he could trust Midoriya. Maybe it was his face when he talked about Bakugo, but for some reason Shudo thought that if anyone could understand what he was going through, it was this boy he'd barely met. You just radiate safe, if that makes sense. Shudo comments. Their squad agrees easily. He sighed and leaned against the wall. Have you ever heard of quirk marriages? Todoroki freezes and Izuku reaches to grip his hand. Midoriya's eyes widened in realization. No, Shudo nodded sadly. My father always wanted to be #1. I guess he is now, but he wanted it to be because of his power. not because All Might got himself killed. He had enough money and power as the #2 hero to buy off my mother's family and force her into a marriage. He got her virginity multiple times trying to create a child with a quirk strong enough to beat All Might. He raised me to be his masterpiece, not his son. Midoriya was listening with wide eyes and Shudo took a deep breath. It felt liberating to finally talk about this. In every memory I have of my mother, she's always crying. She called my left side unbearable, right before she poured boiling water on my face. I never blamed her though, it was all my father's fault for forcing her to that point. Silence. So you were underplaying the sit father thing. Maruko growls. When we return, your son will be joining me for sessions, at least one session a week, and you will sign off on it without hesitation. Am I clear? Hound Dog asserts. Crystal. Endeavor agrees. Midoriya was staring at him strangely. You must hate your father, then. And people call me blunt. Sue jokes, still leaning closer to Todoroki after the revelation of his trauma. Shudo thought for a moment. Midoriya had said it like a statement rather than a question, but he wanted to answer it anyway. Did he hate his father? He thought about the rage he buried under a layer of ice, about the fear he felt when he thought about using his fire. Is that what hate felt like? Yes, it is. Ito winced. Yes, he said firmly. I think I really do hate him. Endeavor sighs. Midoriya nodded. I think that's good then. I understand why you don't want to use your fire, but just so you know, it's your quirk, not his, and you can always use it to do things your father would hate. Good luck. Todoroki crushed Katsuki for me, and with that, Midoriya waved and left Todoroki to make his way back to his classmates. Where'd you go, you half and half Biasri? Bakugo yelled. I looked everywhere for you and couldn't find you. Shudo felt consumed by the hatred he had just realized he felt, and it left him numb as he thought about Midoriya's words. I ran into an old friend of yours. Friend? Ishido laughed. Bakugo had friends before you, eh? Oi, Bakugo growls while Ishido snickers. Shut up, Pinky, Bakugo yelled. Who was it? Izuku. Midoriya. He's interesting. Bakugo sneered. Deku? He's worthless and he's not my friend. I'd never sink low enough to be that idiot's friend. Shudo nodded absently. I liked him. He then tuned out any response Bakugo had and the laughter of their other classmates. He had a lot to think about. Well, that was ominous. Shinso deadpants. Let's hope that's all it is. Ida remarks. Viridian's on his way to a hospital, isn't he? Uraraka asks. That's right, Karo. Tsu agrees. Hope he heals quickly. Izuku sighs. The next chapter starts up. Now playing Viridian. The green guide the hospital. Izuku let mom lead him into the waiting room and he sat down while she went to the desk to fill out the paperwork. When she was done, she came and sat beside him, but there wasn't anything she could say to make the situation better, so they just sat silently until Izuku's name was called. A nurse led them into an examination room and took Izuku's vitals. She took in Izuku's bruises, then looked at Inko suspiciously. What happened? Nothing, Izuku said quickly. I just fell. There was a fight at school. Inko interrupted. He's been hiding the bullying from me, so it makes sense he'd hide it from you as well, but you don't have to do that anymore, Izuku. Good mama. Midnight smiles. They're going to suspect her. Eraser warns. It's protocol. Tsukachi reminds. Doesn't make it better. Mike pouts. Izuku stared at the ground again and the nurse nodded before she left to go get the doctor. Izuku. Whatever she was going to say was cut off by the doctor opening the door. Izuku. Midoriya? Izuku nodded and the doctor sat down beside the examination table he was sitting on. Can you tell me what's going on? I'm fine, Izuku said. I can handle it. Mom's just worried. Izuku. Inko was starting to get exasperated. Why wouldn't Izuku let them help him? It never got that bad for me, but I'd have to say habit. Izuku sighs sadly. That's okay. The doctor smiled. I'm sure you're a strong young man. But why don't you show me what your mom's worried about, to ease her nerves at the very least? Izuku frowned for a moment before shrugging off his uniform jacket, then his shirt, struggling as he tried to undo the buttons one-handed. Inko almost helped him, but one look was enough to tell her that Izuku needed to do that much on his own. She struggled not to gasp in horror when she saw the collection of bruises that had been hiding beneath his clothes, some already in the healing stages, which meant that this was far from the only beating Izuku had received. Gasp, hiss, ouch, yikes, winced the doctor though. Just took the injuries in stride and gently started prodding at his arm. Does this hurt? Izuku winced but shook his head. The doctor sighed. I'd feel more comfortable getting some x-rays, okay? Mrs. Midoriya, you stay here and I'll walk Izuku over to radiology, okay? You're literally sitting in a doctor's office trying to say the clearly crooked arm doesn't hurt. Shinso levels a look at the screen. A broken arm isn't something to mess with. Izuku scrunches his nose. You would know. Uraraka teases, earning herself a stuck-out tongue from her friend. Izuku thought everyone was overreacting. Sure, his arm hurt, but it wasn't broken. Probably. Honestly, Izuku hadn't thought through what would happen if it was and they hadn't gone to the hospital, but his arm didn't hurt enough to be broken. After the x-rays were taken, he was expecting the doctor to lead him back to the room where his mom was waiting, but the doctor led him to a different one instead. Why would they do that? Kaminari asks. The doctor closed the door and turned to face Izuku. Midoriya? I just want to let you know that you're safe here and we will do everything in our power to help you, okay? Oh, they think he's being abused. Momo worries. Technically he is. Jiro reminds. Izuku nodded. He wasn't quite sure why the doctor was telling him this. Wasn't that what doctors were there for? Good. The doctor said. Now, is everything okay at home? Izuku looked at the doctor in confusion. Yes? Why wouldn't it be? Well, sometimes when kids come in with injuries like yours. Izuku's eyes widened. You think Mom did this to me? No, he tried to instinctively wave his arms in front of him, but winced at the pain the action caused. No, Mom would never hurt me. I know we've seen so, but it's nice to have confirmation. Recovery girl informs. Are you sure? The doctor asked softly. You don't have to protect her. No, I just... Izuku started crying again. I love my mom. I didn't tell her about the bullying because I didn't want her to worry and there's nothing she could have done anyways and I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but then it got worse and I still didn't tell her and then today happened and then the principal called and I didn't want to come here and now she's gonna get in trouble and it's all my fault and... Breath. Midoriya. The doctor sounded slightly panicked. Your mom isn't going to get in trouble. We just needed to make sure that there wasn't any abuse happening and for that, we needed to ask without her in the room. I didn't mean to scare you, I'm sorry. We might have to ask these questions someday. Sato remarks. It will be deterrent, certainly. Aoyama nods sadly. Izuku nodded shakily. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry. The doctor smiled. It's not your fault. I'm glad your mom's taking care of you, just let her know in the future. Make her job a little easier, okay? Okay. He felt a little bad for lying to the doctor, but things would be so much better if Mom just thought this was an isolated incident. She wouldn't have to worry so much. Problem child. Aizawa groans. The doctor walked him back to the room where Mom was waiting and opened the file the radiologist gave him. All right, it looks like you have a break in your left arm, but your ribs are fine, so that's the good news. I just need to set the bone and put a cast on it and you'll be good to go. What color do you want? Izuku shrugged. A few months ago he probably would have gone with all Might colors, but now, green's fine. He decided finally. It didn't need to match his vigilante gear, but green was his vigilante color, so it made him feel useful. Not like a Deku who got his arm broken at school and got his mother accused of child abuse. He was so stupid. No, the FCK you aren't. Kirishima snaps at the screen and blushes at his outburst. Sorry. No, you're right. Ishido assures. The cast took longer to put on than Izuku had thought it would. It had to dry in between the various layers, but by the end, he had a semi-comfortable cast that encased his arm from the elbow down. Now if only he actually had friends to sign it. Alright, Midoriya, you're almost good to go. I'll just send in the nurse who can go over how to care for the cast. Thank you so much, Mom said. The doctor smiled. My pleasure. Once they were alone, the same awkward silence fell that had dominated the whole afternoon. Inko looked over at Izuku and wondered how to bring up what she'd started thinking about while Izuku had been getting his x-rays. I don't think that school is working, she said finally. You think? Dabi snarks. Izuku looked at her. What? The school, she said. I don't think it's a good fit. If they knew what those other kids were doing to you and blamed you instead of doing anything to stop it, then, she sighed, but I know how close you've always been with Katsuki. I don't want to separate you from him. Asiro winces about that. Izuku bit his lip and Inko could see his brain working overtime as he debated what to say. You don't think Kaken would miss me? Not yet. Izuku huffs under his breath. Inko felt her heart break all over again. Had Katsuki? She'd hoped that he had protected Izuku because he wanted to be a hero, but with how broken Izuku sounded, and how convinced he seemed that Katsuki wouldn't miss him, her poor baby. Bakugo sinks in his seat. We could look into transferring you to a different school, she said. To her surprise, Izuku shook his head. There wouldn't be any point. I'm the problem and that's going to be the same wherever I go. Going to a new school would just mean I'd be quirkless and the new kid. Reality is a cruel entity indeed. Tokoyami rumbles. Inko frowned. Unfortunately, she saw Izuku's logic. The bullying had started because he was diagnosed as quirkless and Izuku was right, that wasn't going to change. She'd like to believe that a new school would be better and kinder, but kids were cruel. There was a good chance his new classmates would be just as bad or even worse than the ones he had now. She couldn't do that to him. So what can she do? Hagakure worries. But she also couldn't, in good conscience, send him back to Aldera. Not after how they'd had the audacity to blame him for being bullied. But what other options were there? What if we could find something online? She suggested. You can't be bullied by other students if there are none. That could work. Midnight considers. He'll be isolated though. Mike mentioned with worry. Better that than dead. Aizawa snaps. Izuku looked skeptical. Does something like that even exist? Inko shrugged. I don't know, but if it does, would you at least look into it? See if it's something you'd be interested in? Izuku thought for a long moment and Inko was starting to get worried she'd somehow said the wrong thing when Izuku smiled. Okay mom. I promise I'll look into it when we get home. That would have been so nice. Izuku says wistfully. Tomorrow. Inko said. When we get home, we're not going to worry about anything except eating dinner and watching TV. Deal. Izuku laughed. Deal. There was a knock on the door and the nurse walked in. Hello Midori. Yes? I'm here to give you some instructions, then you'll be good to go. That cast needs to stay on for about 6 weeks to give your arm adequate time to heal. Keep it dry and don't participate in any sports or vigorous activities that could irritate your arm until you get the cast off. Make sure to call us if you think anything is wrong, and that's about it. You're free to go. Mom thanked the nurse and they left. Izuku felt his stomach twist as he mentally reviewed the instructions. He wasn't allowed to do any physical activity that could jostle his arm for the next month and a half. If he did, he could re-injure his arm, which would just cause more trouble for everyone and put Mom through all this worry all over again, and he couldn't do that to her. So what was he supposed to do about his vigilantism? Oh no. Izuku says in horror, standing and turning toward his teacher. Aizawa-sensei, I'm so sorry. For what? Aizawa says concerned. That other you just figured out that he's suicidal and he's going to disappear. Izuku stresses. Aizawa groans, dragging a hand down his face as the rest of the room reacts. Damn it, poor sensei, this will be painful. FCK. A loud clap reverberates through the room, silencing all. I know you're worried, but we can't see what happens next unless we move on. The audience is quick to settle in for more. Now playing cheat code. Support strategist Petty Izuku frowned in frustration as he turned off his computer and gathered his things in preparation to go to their core classes. He'd spent most of the afternoon watching Class 1A through the cameras as they did some sort of indoor combat exercise that All Might had put together, and it was frustrating. Don't get him wrong, it was amazing to see all of the students' amazing quirks in action. It was just so frustrating to see them acting so far beneath their potential, like that kid with the electricity quirk who fried his brain within seconds of the exercise starting, or the kid with the hot and cold quirk who didn't even use his heated side until the exercise was already over. They could do so much more. They could save so many people if they could just think a little more creatively. I know, I'm working on it. Kaminari whines. He'll be resistant to that advice. Todoroki sighs. And then there was Katsuki. He had everything. He had an amazing quirk, good battle sense, and even some of the techniques Izuku had suggested before Katsuki had started bullying him. He really did have the potential to be an amazing hero, maybe even the best if he wasn't so violent. And who knows how much better he would be if not for Momo pauses to find the right words. They're falling out. She finishes carefully. He hardly noticed May start rambling to him as soon as he sat down at the desk outside his workroom to wait for the teacher to arrive, until she slammed her hands down and leaned down until she was nose to nose with him. Okay, what's up? Izuku leaned back slightly and stuttered, what? May rolled her eyes and leaned forward even more so that Izuku was forced to lean all the way back in his seat until his head was touching the wall behind him. You're dragging your feet. Didn't you get to watch the hero course fight today? I wasn't even expecting to be able to get a word in edgewise. But here you are giving one-word answers. You caught on to my habits fast. Izuku sounds impressed. You're really straightforward. May dismisses. Izuku shrugged. It's just Kai was observing my bully's class today. Instantly, May looked murderous. I can't believe they let that a-hole in after what he did to you, and didn't he try to attack extra credit Kuin during the exam? I should go straight to Nedzu and tell him that he needs to expel that jerk immediately. Izuku interrupted her with a sigh. You can't do that, May. First of all, my teachers purposely never reported the bullying so there wouldn't be red flags when he applied to UA. Second of all, he didn't attack Shinso. Even if he had actually hurt him, it would have just been as collateral damage or in retribution for yelling at him. Last of all, he probably shouldn't be expelled. Why the hell not? Siro asks incredulously. No offense, bro. I've been asking the same question. Bakugo scoffs. And why not? May's yell caught the attention of the rest of the class. He's a bully, Izuku. He made you miserable for years. He shouldn't be a hero. Wait, what are we talking about? Kahaku interrupted, pulling off the scarf she used to cover her hair while inventing. What's this about a bully being a hero? Nothing, Izuku said quickly. May shot him a glare before turning to the rest of the class. The traitor, Izuku's old bully, somehow got into the hero course. He was part of the class, Izuku observed today. What? Hanzo bared his teeth, his normal wide smile becoming sharp and intimidating. What's his name? I just want to talk. Izuku groans much to his friend's amusement. Everybody stop, Izuku said sternly. Nobody is going to do anything. Nobody's going to try to fight him and nobody's going to Nedzu. Understood? Mei didn't drop her glare, but... No. Izuku held her gaze. So what did he do today that put you in such a funk? Kahaku asked. Like I was expecting to have to tell you to shut up at least 3 times. Izuku made a sound of offense. See. Mei gestured broadly to her. I'm not the only one who noticed. Izuku shot her a look. It's nothing. Yeah, no dude. Hanzo said with a small smile. We're not buying that. Izuku looked around the room hoping for someone to be on his side, but even Shiguro shrugged. If it was really nothing you probably wouldn't be so insistent? He has a point. Uraraka teases. Izuku sige. He should have expected that his classmates would be at least as curious as he was, especially after meeting Mei. This was what he got for joining the support course. It was just annoying. There was an odd number of students, something about a student leaving because of Eraserhead's hazing yesterday, so he was put by himself against 2 other students, one with a speed quirk and the other with gravity negation. It will be interesting to see how certain events play out differently. Ida mentions. Except in Mastermind. Izuku scowls. No, but how is our class going to handle things without him? Todoroki ponders. Not to mention Deku attending without one for all, Karo. Tsu wonders. We'll make it through. Uraraka comforts. Ha, Kahaku chuckled. Shouldn't that be a good thing? I bet he got his butt handed to him, didn't he? Izuku shook his head. He put them both in the infirmary. Like, I know that violence is an inherent part of the hero industry. You can't defeat villains without hurting them, but none of the other students were injured badly enough to have to get medical attention. One of the signs of an amazing hero is actually how much they're able to avoid harm. He shook his head. I'm probably just being nitpicky because of our history. No problem, child, it is not. Aizawa grits his teeth. Probably. Hanzo agreed. But that still doesn't mean he should be in the hero course if he bullied you, dude. What's to stop him from going totally crazy and hurting someone who's not a villain? Shiguro nodded in agreement. I wouldn't want any of my old bullies to be heroes either. Yeme crossed her arms in front of her chest. So I'm going to Nedzu and telling him to kick this guy out. That rat loves you enough to give you a whole room. I'm sure he'd be happy to expel him for you. Sadly not without proof. Niza frowns. Izuku wasn't so sure, but surprisingly, he realized that it might not be outside of the realm of possibility. It was so surreal to have adults who actually cared, and if that was all there was to it, then Izuku might actually be tempted to go to Nedzu himself, seeing as he most likely wouldn't get punished for snitching, but the situation was a little more complicated than that. It's not that I want Katsuki to be a hero so much that I don't want him to be a villain. Does that make sense? Bakugo flinches. He's a bully, Izuku and Mei protested. Already a villain in my book. Izuku looked around and saw his classmates looking confused and still angry on his behalf, but didn't see any of the understanding he'd been expecting. He sighed. He has the potential to be a decent hero, and his violent tendencies will be directed toward villains, but if he gets expelled or worse, blacklisted, what'll he do? At least as a hero, his violent tendencies will be directed toward villains and people who deserve it, rather than any civilian who looks at him wrong. Bakugo growls wordlessly, gripping his armrests while Kirishima rubs his shoulder. Still doesn't mean he deserves to be a hero. Mei grumbled. Izuku shrugged. Maybe not, but it isn't even a big deal. It's not like I'm going to see him a lot. We're in different departments and I'm going to start arriving early, so I won't even see him on my way to school. The only interaction I'll even have with him will be my analysis project. He won't even read anyway, so just drop it. He's got your number. Ishido chuckles. Whatever. Bakugo grumbles. His classmates didn't necessarily seem happy with his explanation, but at least they saw the logic in it. Izuku supposed that was about as good as he could hope for. Everyone here was extremely intelligent, they wouldn't have gotten in otherwise, but nerds often weren't treated the best. Add to that Hanzo's mutation quirk, Shiguro's shyness, and Mei being Mei, and there was a good chance that every single one of his classmates had been bullied at some point in their lives. Of course they wouldn't be happy about letting a bully off the hook. Ain't that the truth? Mei laughs. There's gotta be a way to get some sort of revenge at least, right? Hanzo said after a long minute. I mean, we can't just let that dude get off scot-free. Mei's eyes lit up, so Izuku interrupted. That's really not necessary, guys. No, Kahaku grinned, but it'll be fun. Revenge of the Nerds. Toga cheers. Mei grinned in return. Oh, I like you. Come on. Izuku revenge, where the support course will have access to all his babies. Izuku rolled his eyes. As fun as that would be, he's still a hero student, and it's our responsibility as support students to support him, not sabotage him. Not to mention that faulty support gear could potentially endanger not only him, but also his classmates and eventually civilians, so revenge is out of the question. Thank you. Majima sighs in relief. Kahaku thought for a long moment. What about just being a little petty? Izuku looked at her curiously, which she took as permission to continue. I mean, obviously we wouldn't do anything to put him in danger or anything, that would be stupid, but you know how annoying a tiny little rock can be when it's in your shoe? Yes, Shinso grins. Mei's eyes lit up again. You're suggesting we do a bunch of tiny things to annoy him? Oh please do. Kaminari bounces in excitement. Kahaku nodded, grinning. It's how I got rid of my bullies back in elementary school before everyone learned not to mess with me. The big thing is plausible deniability. Don't do anything that you couldn't talk your way out of if the teachers ask. But we'll know, which will be really satisfying if he gets a shirt that's say half a size too small and the slightly wrong shade. That will drive me insane. Bakugo confirms. Izuku thought about that for a minute. He had to admit that it might be fun, provided that no actual harm was being done, since he didn't want to become a bully in return or put Katsuki in any danger, and if he could stop at any time, I suppose it wouldn't be too bad to get a little payback. It may not be gratuitous violence, but it'll be fun. Dabi grins. Yes, Mei pumped her fist and hugged him, causing him to turn bright red as the rest of the class laughed at him. Oh, we're gonna have so much fun. I'm gonna make so many little nuisance babies. So many ideas. Mei cheers. Someone clearing their throat behind them made the class freeze, and they turned around to see Midnight standing in the doorway, looking like she just arrived. You're not being naughty, are you? Yes they are, dear. Midnight laughs. Izuku and Mei shared a panicked glance before he sat up straight and gave a bright smile. No ma'am, or at least I wasn't. I'm already in my seat. Everyone else, however? The class rushed to find their seats as Midnight laughed at their reactions. Izuku smiled and took out a new notebook, simply labeling it nuisance. He'd known this year was going to be fun. You really just threw them under the bus. Uraraka snickers. They can handle it. Izuku blushes. Yeah, okay, shut up. It's time for the disaster that is us teaming up. Shinso drawls. Oh yeah, that'll be great. Everyone hush. Izuku brightens. Their friends smile and laugh at them but are quiet anyway. Now playing Shadows. The horror movie hero's introductions. Mom fretted in the doorway as Izuku organized his notes and papers so that Shinso wouldn't be too overwhelmed when he arrived. Thankfully, he didn't seem like the type who scared too easily, or else Izuku would have already ruined all chances for their friendship. Partnership? Whatever it was before it even began. It wasn't his fault that he got so excited. It hadn't even occurred to him that Shinso might not be nearly as excited as he was about using fear to become a different kind of hero. To Izuku, the realization felt like it had completely turned the world on its head. Becoming a hero like All Might had always felt like an impossible mountain he needed to climb, and every person who called him weak or useless, just because he didn't have a quirk, was yet another boulder that he needed to scramble over just to find the path, not to mention actually climbing the mountain. Once he stopped worrying about being liked, though, it was like someone had taken dynamite to the road and blown all the boulders to shreds. It was still an uphill battle, but now it was doable. If he didn't have to be liked, then all that he had to do was be hated, and Izuku had plenty of experience with that. That is beautifully tragic. Tokoyami nods. For the first time in his life, I'm going to be a hero felt less like a dream and more like a promise, and even if it was a little selfish, he really hoped that Shinso felt the same way. It would be a lot easier to be a hero if he actually had someone rooting for him. I know what you mean. Shinso sighs. The doorbell rang and Izuku leapt to his feet. I'll get it. Mom pursed her lips as he pushed past her, and Izuku felt a pang of guilt. She was always a bit disappointed whenever he got a renewed sense of hero fervor, and he was pretty sure that she was secretly hoping that he'd come home one day and announce that he'd decided on a more sensible, safer career. However much he hated worrying her, though, he hated the idea of being useless even more, so hopefully she'd at least be proud of him. She should be. Uraraka huffs. Shinso looked bored when Izuku opened the door, but his stance was guarded, so Izuku suspected that it was an intentional move, kind of like how Izuku sometimes smiled to hide how nervous he was. Izuku grinned brightly and grabbed Shinso's arm. If he was feeling anxious, then Izuku would just have to show him that there was nothing to be nervous about. Come on, and I've been waiting for you can tell? Shinso asks. Anxiety disorder. Galu Ivertoid. Fair enough. Shinso concedes. Shinso didn't say anything, but he did nod and take off his shoes, so Izuku kept rambling to fill the silence. My room is this way. I hope you don't mind that I've kind of been getting a head start on some research. Shinso was already starting to lose a little bit of his bored expression. Research? Izuku shrugged. Like tactics and strategy, you know? Like how fear tactics have been used in the past. Some of them obviously rely on a lot of violence, so those aren't really something we want in our arsenal, but we should still know they exist, and maybe we can find a way to modify them to fit our goals a little better. Shinso raised an eyebrow. So basically you've been studying villains. He's gonna use our tactics against us. Twice worries we won't fall for it. Should be fun to see. Dabi muses. Izuku blushed. Not just villains. Good. Shinso smirked. How else are we supposed to scare them out of their minds if we don't know what they're used to? I like the idea of turning their own tricks against them. It's like intentional karma. Karma's only a beach if you are. May grins. Izuku blinked too, hadn't thought of it like that. Izuku? Mom said softly. Is this your friend? Yeah, Izuku stepped to the side so she could see him better. This is Shinso. Shinso gave her a little wave and Izuku realized he was probably used to introducing himself silently so that he didn't make anyone uncomfortable with his quirk. Izuku understood. He didn't often introduce his quirk at first because he was afraid of how people would react. But he didn't have to worry about people getting scared, just hostile. He just wished that Mom hadn't looked so grateful that Shinso stayed quiet. Mom. Izuku whines. It's fine, I'm used to it. Shinso dismiss. You shouldn't have to be used to it. Uraraka growls. And yet I am. Shinso sighs. He probably shouldn't have told her about Shinso's quirk, but when he'd said that he was inviting a friend over, she'd wanted to know everything about him. Izuku had, as usual, gotten too excited and started rambling about how cool Shinso's quirk was, because it was, and how it was going to be so useful when they were heroes. It wasn't until he saw the terrified look on her face that he realized she might see Shinso as a threat and not an ally. Instantly he started being more vague, but the damage had already been done. At least he'd managed to convince her to let him come over still, but realistically he knew that Mom only allowed it so that she could supervise them instead of letting Izuku go off to meet with his dangerous new friend somewhere where she couldn't protect him. It wasn't fair, but Izuku was going to become just as dangerous as Shinso was and prove that he didn't need her protection. They were going to be amazing heroes. Having to prove yourself to your own mother, Momo sighs. He'll do it without a doubt. Jiro says confidently. Mom smiled nervously at Shinso and turned back to Izuku. Okay. Well, keep the door open and I'll be out here if you need anything, baby. Anything at all. Just yell. Okay, bitch. Shigaraki mumbles. Izuku's heart sank. Got it? Mom nodded and stepped aside so that she wasn't blocking the hallway. Izuku didn't say anything else as he led Shinso to his room and closed the door as much as possible so that it was just barely cracked open. He grimaced and turned to Shinso. I am so sorry. Shinso shrugged. My foster parents are the same way, don't worry about it. I mean, we're trying to turn that fear to our advantage, right? That's kind of the whole idea. Izuku frowned and went to his desk. I guess so. Okay, here's everything I've got so far. Where do you want to start? You're the one that did the research. Shinso groans, causing Izuku to snicker. Toshinori was a little overwhelmed at the moment. He wasn't ready to retire yet. There were still so many people to save and the world still needed a symbol of peace. Sure, Nedzu had pointed out that teaching wasn't really a retirement, but Toshinori still felt like he was being forced away from the front lines. He had to face the truth. All Might was past his prime. Had been for years now. Gran Torino snarked. Still, retirement or not, Toshinori knew that he wouldn't be able to really rest until he had found a successor. One for All was a sacred power and the next symbol of peace would be able to care for the world in his place, so it was his responsibility to nurture their progression and encourage them to become the shining pinnacle of justice he had once been. The only issue was, well, finding the perfect successor. Without sacrificing their individuality. All Might adds. Toshinori put his vibrating phone back in his pocket, deciding to let Nitai's call go to voicemail. Again. It was impossible to tell whether he was calling about One for All or about Toshinori's new job at UOL. Maybe it wasn't impossible, but that would require actually picking up the phone and talking to him, so it was out of the question. Whatever conversation Night-Eye wanted, Toshinori wasn't ready to have it yet. I should have kept in touch. Yagi sighs. For now, he needed to focus on finding his elusive successor. He could always wait until classes started at UA and have his pick from among the elite students there, but he couldn't help feeling anxious to find the next symbol of peace as soon as humanly possible. If he could find a first year before they entered UA, then there was a chance they'd be able to receive One for All before classes even started. Yes, that would be the best case scenario. So the original plan was to wait until he started teaching us. Kaminari realizes. That means it could have been any of us. Zero grins. Headcase said Clouds doesn't like repetition, so we'll see at least one of us with it. Ishido bounces. He wished he knew who had somehow gotten the sludge villain to run the other day. He had been standing in the crowd cursing himself when the cry went out that All Might was just down the street, so he knew it had been a ruse, but somehow, it had been just enough to get the villain to drop the hostage, which was more than any of the heroes present had accomplished. The child that had started the cry undoubtedly had a good head for strategy and would likely make a good successor, but no one had been able to tell who exactly had been the one to set the plan in motion, so there was no way for Toshinori to find them. Toshinori was obviously a little disappointed, but the child would undoubtedly become a great hero on their own merits someday, so he couldn't afford to spend too much time worrying about it. He just needed to find someone with a good heart and a strong enough will that. Toshinori stumbled as he ran into someone, knocking them to the ground. He'd been too wrapped up in his thoughts he shouldn't have gotten so distracted, some hero he was. He bent over to help the man up. "Oh, I'm so sorry I wasn't watching where I was going, this is all my fault, pay attention to where you're going." Gran chastised. "You think?" A young lady glared at him as she practically pushed him out of the way to help the man up. "Are you okay, Dad?" "Holy shit, it's me," Jiro says in surprise. The man laughed and rolled his shoulder. "I'm fine. You're stronger than you look, man, I'd hank you," Toshinori said nervously. "Again, I am so sorry." "You better be." The young lady hadn't stopped glaring at him. "You could have hurt him, especially if you've got a strength quirk. Watch where you're going next time, as passionate as ever I see." Momo teases. "Don't be rude, Kyoka, he already apologized." The man smiled. "My name is Kyoto Kujiro and this is my daughter Kyoka Jiro. And seriously, don't sweat it, I'm just fine." "Well, that's good to hear," Toshinori said. "It's admirable that you are so concerned about your father's safety, young lady." "Well, somebody has to be," young Jiro muttered. "Goodness knows he doesn't care about it enough. Jiro's so caring." Uraraka chuckles. "We already knew that, Karo." Tsu agrees. Kyoto laughed and ruffled her hair. "Well, that's what I have you for, my little hero. And soon enough the entire world is gonna see it once you get into UA." Jiro pushed him away. "Stop it, Dad. You're so embarrassing." Jiro's head is buried in her hands. Toshinori perked up. "You're going to UA? I have to pass the entrance exam first." Jiro huffed. "But yeah, that's the plan. You'll make it. We love having you with us, kick some." But Toshinori considered his next move carefully. This young lady was a bit rough around the edges, but she had an inner fire and protectiveness that reminded him of Nana. She would make a wonderful hero and, with some training, she had the potential to be an amazing symbol of peace too. He also couldn't deny that a 10-month head start would give her a huge advantage over if he waited until school began, and since she already had that drive to be a hero, nodded firmly, mind made up. "That's it? That's all it took?" Jiro shouts. "He picked me for jumping into a fight I wasn't at all prepared for." Izuku levels at her. "This is a step up in reasoning." "Well, when you put it that way." Jiro snarks. Their friends snicker at the interaction while Toshinori pouts at the back. "I have considerable experience working with heroes. In fact, I've worked at All Might's agency for almost my entire career." Toshinori smiled softly. "I'd be happy to help train you for the entrance exam if you'd like." "Really?" Kyoto's eyes widened. "Well, Kyoka, what are you waiting for? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. You know what I always say? Never turn down an adventure, say yes." Jiro just ignored her father and looked at Toshinori skeptically. "And what would this training look like?" "A question I should have asked." Izuku murmurs. "A muscle training, mostly," Toshinori answered, a bit thrown off. "And quirk training." "Who knows, with enough training, your quirk might develop into something else entirely. I have other resources that, if you choose to accept them, will set you on the path to becoming one of the greatest heroes in the world." Jiro frowned for another long moment and Toshinori was terrified she was going to say no until she shrugged. "Well, it's not like I have another training plan right now, but this had better be worth it, okay? If not, I'm dropping you." Torino laughs. "I like this one." Toshinori blinked in shock. "Of course, that sounds reasonable." Jiro nodded and her father instantly wrapped an arm around both of them. "Ah, my little girl's gonna be a hero, Dad." Jiro blushed. "I'm not a little girl anymore." Toshinori smiled. The girl knew how to stand up for herself. Good. He had a feeling he'd made the right choice. This is going to be great. Izuku begins. "I wonder how One for All will interact with her quirk?" In Mastermind he couldn't pass it along, and in Deku, it seems like permeation can't be enhanced. Will her hearing be improved further, or will she get the physical enhancements, or a combination of both? All Might said when Nana got One for All, her float got powerful enough to be considered flight. And what about the other stories? Who will he choose in Viridian and Cheat Code? Izuku glances around to see his friend's attention stuck on him while the rest of the room got ready for bed. "Oh, I guess we should turn in for the night." After a good night's rest, refreshed and ready for more, the next chapter plays. Now playing Deku? "I think he's some pro." The raid. Izuku checked his weapons for what felt like the millionth time as he and Eraser waited at the police station for the other heroes to arrive. While the raid wouldn't start for a few more hours, everyone was meeting here one last time to go over the plan and make sure everything was ready. "That happens for every raid, or at least the one I was part of too," Kirishima mentions. "So it's standard procedure?" Kaminari asks. "Makes sense." Zero nods. The Durago drag cartel was one of the biggest suppliers of black market opioids in Japan, and there was a risk that if they didn't wipe it out all in one go, it would act like a hydra and grow back even stronger than before, so this was a much larger operation than most raids. The cartel had 5 main bases in Tokyo, so the heroes and police would be split into teams to raid each of them simultaneously. Most of the teams had only 2 or 3 heroes depending on the size of the base, but the team assigned to the main base was much larger because that's where the leaders were. Like what they did to us. Shigaraki grumbles. The police hadn't been able to find any information on the leaders and their quirks, just that they would be in the building tonight, so they needed Izuku to be on site to give a live analysis to the heroes. Eraser was coming for much the same reason. It wouldn't matter what quirks the leaders have if they couldn't use them. Ambush is your bread and butter. Mike chuckles. It's where I'm most effective, so it's only logical. Aizawa says evenly. Night Eye had been assigned to read the head villain's future to help make sure they weren't missing anything important, while Mr. Brave and Joke volunteered to go with them. Nobody had wanted to argue because they were both close to Deku and everyone knew how protective they could get. All in all, their entire little group had been assigned to the same base and Izuku was practically vibrating in nervousness and excitement. We'll kick some, but Brave cheers. Anything for Eraser. Joke chuckles. Oh. Aizawa deadpants. Are you okay? Eraser tried to mask his concern behind a raised eyebrow. You haven't stopped moving since we arrived. Izuku forced himself to stop bouncing in place. I'm just a little nervous. I know I've been going on patrols with you guys for a while now, it's just this is the first time I'm really going to be facing villains, you know? Eraser glared at him. I do not know, considering that you have been ordered not to engage. Let's see how long that lasts. Todoroki deadpants. Izuku waved his arms wildly. I know that I'm not going to pick any fights. I swear, but I am going to be in close quarters with these villains and there's a chance they might come after me if things go south. He unbuttoned one of the pouches on his belt and refastened it almost immediately, just so he'd have something to do with his hands. I'm excited, but I'm also scared, you know? I'm gonna get him some fidget toys. It sounds like he might need them. Ajaru claims, playing with his own tail. Eraser's glare softened. I'd be concerned if you weren't. He sighed. The fact is that what we do is dangerous. It's worth it to protect people, but there is always the possibility that things will go wrong and we won't make it home. It's always difficult for students to learn that, especially ones who love the idea of being a hugely popular hero. The fact that you're scared is a good sign that you're prepared for what we're going to see in there. He looked away. I'm proud of you. A chorus of teasing coos fills the room as Aizawa pretends not to be embarrassed and Izuku grins sheepishly. Izuku's eyes widened. What? Eraser scoffed but smiled. You heard me the first time, problem child. If you're going to make me repeat myself, maybe you have less potential than I thought you did. He stiffened as Izuku flung himself forward and wrapped his arms around him. He'd awkwardly lifted a hand to pat the kid's hair when he heard a shudder CLCK and looked up to see MS. Joke. And Mr. Brave standing in the doorway, grinning smugly. Joke thumbed through her phone. Oh, this is prime blackmail material right here. Izuku turned bright red as Eraser jumped up and glared down. Joke. Delete it. Never. Joke cries above the laughter of the audience. Joke. What? Eraser? You don't want all your students to know you're a giant softie at heart? She ran away from Eraser as Brave finally collapsed on the floor laughing. Izuku joined in, enjoying the last light-hearted moments before he would finally embark on his first real mission. 1,000 yen on Deku jumping in. Uraraka suggests, can we not gamble on my other selves? Izuku asks. It is quite unheroic. Ida agrees. 2000 says he does it twice. Shinso ignores the complaints. 5 says Aizawa grounds him. Todoroki adds. You are aware he isn't actually his father, right? Mei chuckles. Trust us, Todoroki doesn't care. Karo. Sue smiles at their antics. Okay, remember, Deku, Eraser whispered, you are supposed to stay with at least one of us at all times. Don't go off on your own. Izuku nodded. I understand. Don't worry, Eraser, between all 4 of you and my mother, no one is going to let me do anything reckless. Snort like that's enough to stop him. Jiro jokes. Eraser narrowed his eyes. Problem child. Izuku rolled his eyes and sighed. Fine, I won't go off on my own, okay dad? Snort. Ha savage. Joke had to practically suffocate herself to not give away their position with her laughter as Eraser turned a bright red and tried to hide his face completely in his capture weapon. Izuku smirked and high-fived Brave. That's our kid. Little sit. This is amazing. All right, Night I cut in. Deku, you and Joke will enter through the vents, Eraser and Brave will go through the front entrance, and I'll cover the back in case anyone tries to leave. Keep your radios on and alert everyone of any problems you run into. He looked at the others, who all nodded. Let's go. Izuku followed Joke up the fire escape and onto the roof, crouching next to a vent that was large enough for them to crawl through. Joke carefully unscrewed the cover and set it to the side, then got on her hands and knees and crawled in, Izuku following close behind. After a few feet, there was a vertical they had to go down, so Izuku grabbed his grappling hook and lodged it in the wall. Joke grabbed onto his legs and lowered herself into the, pulling Izuku down along with her as he gradually let out the tension. When they landed, Joke shuffled into a side tunnel to allow Izuku room to land, and he pressed a button on the side of his gear to release the hook from where it was lodged and retracted the line, then crawled after Joke. So cool. Dark Shadow cheers. Indeed. Tokoyami agrees. According to his mental map, they were getting close to the center of the building, which was where the leaders were likely to be. Through the radio, they heard grunts and curses as Eraser and Brave entered the building and started to take out the muscle. They followed a faint light and soon arrived at a large vent. Joke looked through for a moment, then flattened herself against the side to allow Izuku to squeeze past just enough to see through the vent. The vent looked out over a large room with a large desk covered in cash and questionable substances. Behind the desk were two men and a woman, and the way they were surrounded by dozens of guards all looking toward the door made Izuku fairly confident that they were the leaders. Okay, I have eyes on the leaders, he said, thankful for the mask that cancelled his voice. There are 3 of them, but they're surrounded by about 24 thugs, so proceed with caution. Joke started working on unscrewing the vent while Deku observed the people below. About half of the thugs have mutant quirks, but most of those are standing far away from the door, so they probably don't know that Eraser is here. Most of the rest were included on the list of members we already gathered. The 3 leaders are standing away from the door. One of them is a tall red-haired man who looks pretty muscular, but not enough to make me think he has a strength quirk. The second one is also male, but he has a wolf mutant quirk, so most likely fights close combat and uses his teeth as weapons. Be careful of his sense of smell. The last one is a woman with a high black ponytail. She's short, but looks strong and doesn't have any physical manifestations of her quirk. Has he done that to us? Toga asks. Safe bet. Dabi frowns. Understood, Eraser grunted. We're almost at your location. I'll engage the villains now and try to take out some of the mutant quirks. Joke said, that way they'll be distracted when you burst in. Eraser gave the okay and Joke pushed the vent out. It fell to the ground with a large crash and all eyes turned to look as Joke jumped down and started to fight the nearest villains. Laughter filled the air as she used her quirk to pick them off easily, and Izuku stayed in the shadows, muttering strategies and observations. The leaders were hanging back from the fight for now, but Izuku knew that probably wouldn't last long. Okay, just watching Joke fight makes me want to laugh. Sato chuckles. It is très divertissant. Aoyama agrees. All of a sudden, one of the villains slammed his hand into the wall, turning it into magma, and Izuku let out an undignified yelp as he fell into the room. He landed in a roll but was right in the middle of the fight. He didn't jump and he was dragged, and Izuku defends his other self immediately. Deku Joke yelled and Izuku shifted into a battle stance and grabbed his knives. He had a lot more training than he had when he'd been attacked on his internship with Joke. A villain tried hitting him with a series of sparks from his hands, but Izuku dodged, then ran forward and slashed the man across his palms. He tried to let loose another stream of his quirk but screamed as the sparks aggravated his injury. Izuku smiled slightly and used the butt of his knife to knock him out before moving on to his next opponent. Bakugo's eyes widen, and his jaw drops just barely. You can't win this, you know that. A man said, and Izuku turned to see the red-haired leader slowly advancing on him. You might as well give up now. Izuku was filled with despair. Of course they couldn't win, he was just a quirkless Deku and he was here with what? For heroes? What did they think they could do against one of the biggest drag operations in Japan, especially when they all had such cool quirks? Before he knew what he was doing, Izuku had dropped the knife and held up his hands in surrender. What the FCK? Why's he giving up? Is that a quirk? It has to be a quirk. Keep fighting. Wait. Why was he surrendering? He shook himself and looked around to see Eraser glaring down at the red-haired villain, and it's Sealked. The red-haired villain has some kind of persuasion quirk. I think he can convince you of any lie he tells. He told me that we couldn't win and I didn't even think to disagree. Keep your quirk on him, Eraser, I'm gonna knock him out. That's one. Uraraka cheers, Deku, Eraser yelled, probably to tell him to not run toward the stupidly dangerous villain. He was probably right, but Izuku ignored him as he grabbed his other knife from its holster and switched it into his right hand as he ran toward the villain, who was rambling, trying to convince him to give up. Izuku used his small size to his advantage and crouched to slash at the man's stomach. When he jumped back to dodge the knife, Izuku leveled a kick at his knees, making him stumble so that Izuku could reach his head and use the same trick he'd used earlier to knock the man out with the butt of his knife. Diamond, that was smooth. Kaminari grins proudly. Note to self, he muttered, add some kind of tranquilizer to the costume. On it, May cheers. I don't. Izuku stops himself. Have fun. He tells her. Deku, are you okay? Brave yelled. He was currently fighting the wolf mutant leader, who had jumped in front of the woman leader, growling about how he needed to protect his boss. "Yep, I'm just down a knife for now," he replied. A movement in his peripheral vision caught his eye and he saw the woman slipping out through the now-destroyed side wall. "Guys, the main leader is getting away, I'm gonna follow her." "And that's two." Shinso smirks. Deku Eraser swore, knocking out his villain and chasing after the kid. "Seriously, problem child? What did we specifically tell you not to do? Welcome to my life." Aizawa sighs. The woman led him through a maze of hallways before suddenly turning around and facing him. "Big mistake, hero." She jumped and bounced off the wall, coming around to kick Izuku in the kidneys. Some kind of elasticity quirk," he muttered as she continued bouncing around and hitting him, most likely not very good at fighting without it, considering how ingrained it is in her fighting style. "Perfect for sensei." Shoji comments. Suddenly she started laughing. "Nice of you to join us, Eraserhead." Izuku looked behind him to see Eraser standing in the hall. "However, you're out of luck." She stuck her bottom lip out in a fake pout. "Too bad you can't erase my quirk without erasing your friends as well." "Beat, she thought bet, ha, really?" Izuku's eyes lit up as Eraser gave a terrifying smile that was enough to make the woman retreat a few steps. "Good thing my friend is quirkless then, isn't it?" The woman's eyes widened and she jumped, but immediately fell back to earth as Eraser activated his quirk. Izuku took advantage of her stumbling to run forward and throw her over his shoulder and she hit the cement with a cry. Undeterred, she jumped to her feet, but Izuku had been right that she wasn't used to fighting without her quirk. She would seemingly forget that she couldn't use it and try to jump around out of habit and would leave a wide opening for Izuku to take advantage of every time that happened. "Maybe we should put more focus into quirkless sparring," Ida suggests. "I'm in." Uraraka smiles. All of a sudden, she was wrapped in white fabric and her arms were pinned to her sides. Izuku gave one last kick so that she was lying on her side on the ground and couldn't get any purchase to get out of the bindings. Eraser used one hand to keep the tension on his weapon as he put in eye drops with the other. "Good work, Deku." He glared down at him. "Also, you're grounded." Todoroki smirks. Izuku just glares at him while Shinso and Uraraka snicker at them. "What?" Izuku yelled incredulously. Eraser nodded. "We told you not to run off on your own, and then you did. Hence, grounded." Midnight is cackling. "You really went full dad mode, I know, isn't it great?" Joke cheers. "You're not my dad," Izuku said. "You can't ground me." Eraser raised one eyebrow. "I mean, if you'd prefer, I can call your mother right now and give her a play-by-play of exactly what went down so she can ground you herself." "Oh, hell no, Izuku Palace." Izuku waved his hands in front of him frantically. All right, I get it, I'm grounded." Eraser smirked and they both turned as Night Eye came strolling down the hall. "The police have already arrested almost all villains on site. Which one is the leader?" Eraser gave a nod toward the woman on the ground and Night Eye crouched in front of her. He touched her cheek, then cupped her chin roughly to force her to look at him. "It appears our information was accurate. There does not seem to be any indication in the future that the cartel will recover." "Nice, well done, good job." Whoop. An officer came to retrieve the leader and wrap her in quirk suppressants before taking her outside to the fleet of awaiting cop cars. Izuku and the other hero followed and met Joke and Brave outside along with Detective Tsukachi. "Thank you so much for your help, heroes." He smiled. "Especially you, Deku, we couldn't have done it without you. But that doesn't mean I approve of you running after a villain leader with zero warning, Deku," Eraser said sternly. "Oh come on," Eraser. Joke laughed. "Don't pretend like you're not proud of the kid." "Yeah, Eraser, lighten up a bit." Joke teases. "Never." He deadpants. Izuku smiled widely when Eraser sighed but didn't deny the accusation. "Come on, problem child, it's time to go." Izuku stumbled after him. "What do we do now? Just go home?" Eraser turned around quickly and gave a terrifying grin. "Now it's time for the absolute worst part of hero work." Izuku tilted his head in confusion and Eraser's smile grew. "Paperwork." "Galas vathovo." "Boo, oh the humanity, terrible, horrid, diabolical." Dobby laughs. "Pipe down, you little savages, we want to see what's up with Mastermind." The students pout and grumble but concede to the villain's point, and so the next chapter begins. Now playing Mastermind, strategist for hire, the hero killer. Stain, this will be something. Ida grimaces. Meanwhile, this will be amazing. Toga cheers. Mastermind. Izuku looked around and saw a pair of red eyes staring at him from the darkness. "Well, I should hope I'm recognizable by now," he said. "See, Kylie, I am pretty high profile." "Ego does not look good on you, Deku," Uraraka comments. "Agreed," Izuku responds. "You're the one who killed All Might." Izuku smiled behind his mask and threw his arms out to his sides with pride. "What can I do for you?" "Wasn't Stain an All Might fanatic?" Todoroki asks. "So this is gonna escalate." Shinso winces. "You can die." All of a sudden 3 knives shot at him from the darkness. He managed to dodge the first two, but the third grazed his cheekbone before clattering to the ground. His brain kicked into overdrive as he turned to look at his attacker. His eyes widened when he saw Stain, the hero killer. He knew that Stain had been known to kill villains, but that was back in his vigilante days. Now he mostly targeted heroes. Well, except for him, apparently. Izuku quickly picked up the knife that had dropped and wiped off the BLD as best he could. He didn't know how the hero killer's quirk worked exactly, just that it involved BLD and paralysis. But the odds were that there was some sort of BLD ingestion requirement for activation like most blood-related quirks. He pulled his mask up a little higher to cover the cut on his cheek. That'll barely slow him down. Izuku murmurs. How would you know? Mei asks tactlessly. Izuku sighs. Spoilers, probably. So, are you gonna tell me what I did to get on your hit list? Izuku asked. Stain was known to be long-winded, so hopefully he'd monologue for long enough for Izuku to figure out a way to either kill Stain or run away. You killed All Might. All of a sudden, Stain was right next to him, grazing his arm and elking the blade before Izuku could stop him. Izuku fell to the floor as his body gave out on him and he tried to calm his breathing. Stain's quirk had a time limit, Izuku knew that much. He swallowed and hoped his intel was correct about how much Stain liked monologuing. I love my fans but I hate fanatics, All Might says. Easily the worst part of Limelight heroics. Maruko agrees. I haven't had personal experience with it yet but the stories. Hawk shivers. One good thing about being Japan's #1 a-hole is no one has been foolish enough to act in my name. Endeavor huffs. You kill heroes too. We're not so different. You and I. All Might was the one true hero among the scum. He was the only one worthy of the title of hero. The heroes I killed were selfish beings pretending to do what was good for society when in reality they are only furthering their own ends. They needed to be weeded out for the good of society. The heroes I killed sent a message to the ones that remain that they need to improve or else fall victim to my blade. Bullshit. Izuku huffed. And you believe that All Might's death sends the wrong message? Izuku tried to move his fingers to no avail. It sends the opposite message. Killing All Might was an act of senseless violence and for that you must die. By killing All Might, you have not made hero society better, you have deprived it of its crown jewel. There is nothing left worth keeping, all that's left is trash. Don't you understand what you have done? Bullshit. Shigaraki growls under his breath. Izuku's panic was starting to bubble up underneath his calm facade. This was it. This was how he died. He kept trying to move his fingers, but it felt like he wasn't even trying. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end, and then his finger twitched. Izuku resisted the urge to laugh hysterically. It felt like he was moving through taffy but he could move. I don't know who to root for. Dark Shadow groans. Same. Dabi snorts. It's scum like you who make it necessary for me to stain my hands with the BLD of the unworthy. You are what is wrong with society. Does he ever shut up? Jiro groans. Apparently not. Momo huffs. Izuku looked up at Stain but didn't move. It seemed he couldn't feel it when his quirk wore off. Izuku could use that to his advantage. Stain moved around as he spoke and at one point he looked up at the sky. I have judged you and found you unworthy of life. Izuku quietly stood and quickly made his way behind a nearby dumpster. He held his breath as Stain looked back to where he should be. Said he must be typo. He looked in either direction before gathering up his knives. No matter, he can't have gotten far. My blade will still taste his BLD tonight. And with that, Stain hurried out of the alley in search of his prey. King dumbass. Ah. He looked so stupid. Izuku waited for several long minutes before breathing a sigh of relief and coming out of his hiding place. He quickly took off his jacket and mask, hiding his knives inside like he had when he had escaped the hero raid. It was far too dangerous for Mastermind to be on the streets tonight. He's gonna come back with a vengeance. Twice claims and get his butt kicked. Izuku made his way back to base. He thought through the fight. Stain would find him again soon enough, and when he did, only one of them would make it out alive. Shivers. Dabi grins. No. Come on, Stain, be reasonable. We both want to destroy the things we hate. No, Stain pulled out another knife. You want to destroy the things you hate. I want to change society for the better. You have no vision, as evidenced by your killing the only true hero in this godforsaken society. You really biffed that meeting with Stainy. Toga giggles, earning herself a growl from Shiggy. Please Stain, Kurogiri said, we can change society together. Stain shook his head. I will let you live because I think you truly are trying to change society, but if I ever run into Mastermind again he will taste my blade. Killing All Might will lead to all the wrong changes and it is unforgivable. He sheathed his blades. Take me back to Hosu Warp Gate. I still have business there. Unfortunately. Ida sighs. Shudo Todoroki watched Ida brush off Uraraka as she tried to talk to him. He'd originally thought it was strange that Ida was going to intern in Hosu because that's where his brother was attacked, but then he'd seen Ida's eyes. His eyes were full of the same hatred that Shudo felt swirling inside of him. Ever since Midoriya had made him aware of it, he just hadn't been able to ignore the feeling. He felt it constantly to where sometimes it was all he could think about. After years of feeling numb, the anger felt nice? Shudo knew that he should probably talk to someone about this, a therapist or something, but Endeavor was the #1 hero now. Who would ever believe that he had spent years abusing his wife and children, just because of some one-sided rivalry with All Might? We do. Anyone with a brain. Shudo couldn't talk to anyone. He couldn't fight Endeavor and win. So if Ida had something he could do to get rid of this festering anger inside him, who was Shudo to get in the way? He silently wished Ida luck as he watched him leave. Hopefully he'd find what he was looking for. Todoroki winced at the thought. Ida scowled at his on-screen counterpart. Shigaraki scratched at his neck as he overlooked Hosu at sunset. That stupid hero killer. Who does he think he is? I'll show him the change we're capable of. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer to consult with Mastermind before we enact our plan? Kurogiri asked. He has helped us in the past. You don't need a strategist if all you're doing is causing chaos, Kurogiri. Shigaraki replied. Warp in the Nomu. As Kurogiri complied, Shigaraki smiled and looked out at the still peaceful city. I'll show them all by this time tomorrow. Everyone will have forgotten about Stain's pathetic changes if only. Many of the heroes disagree. Izuku cracked his neck as he left the meeting. Hosu was quite the journey from his home base, so he tried to make any prospective clients come to him if they wanted a face-to-face meeting, but this gang had the potential to be a big client and Izuku decided to invest a little effort into making sure they had a good relationship. And this way he'd be able to take care of his little Stain problem. How the turntables. Kaminari grins. What? Bakugo stares at him. It's a meme. Ashido waves him off, to which he rolls his eyes. Now all Izuku needed to do was wander a bit and see if he could find the hero killer. All of a sudden he was blown slightly off course by an explosion and he panicked. What was Katsuki doing here? He was supposed to be interning with Best Jeanist in another city. That is a PTSD response. Hound Dog growls. Does he do that in class? I don't actually know. Aizawa furrows his brow. They tend to avoid each other unless assigned together, so it's rather strong to tell. All Might agrees. Something to ask him about. Hound Dog grumbles. Izuku looked around quickly and sighed when he saw a group of heroes fighting in Nomu. It was just the League. He idly wondered what Shigaraki was trying to accomplish by letting them loose in Hosu of all places, and then decided it didn't matter. What the League chose to do with their resources was their own decision. Mastermind only needed to worry about it if they paid him. That's fair. Shigaraki shrugs. In fact, the League's interference only made things easier, Izuku thought as he headed away from the action. Stain would be somewhere quiet, apart from the chaos, most likely in an alley. None of the heroes noticed Mastermind as he quietly began his search for the hero killer. Oh come on, it stops there? Damn it, next chapter. Now playing Viridian. The Green Guide investigation. Shoyuta looked over the file for the crab villain as he waited for Tsukachi to arrive so they could interrogate him. Of all the trigger dealers he'd shaken down over the past few years, most just evaded his questions and a few tried to run, but no one else had shot up before he had the chance to ask a single question. In Shuta's line of work, a reaction like that meant that the person had something to hide. That is hella sus. Kaminari agrees. According to his files, the crab villain was named Jun Hamasaki and some mid-level dealers had pointed Shoyuta his way, saying that he sold them the drags. He couldn't be anywhere near the top, he didn't have anywhere near enough connections to bring the drags over from America, but he was the highest level dealer Shoyuta had found so far. Everything pointed to Hamasaki knowing something. Now to just get him to talk. Tsukachi sighs. Which is why he had fought tooth and nail, even against a kid like Viridian. Shoyuta took a deep breath and reminded himself that trigger often induced rage, so Hamasaki probably hadn't been thinking entirely clearly when he almost killed Viridian. Shoyuta tried to ignore the voice in his head that said that he'd been thinking clearly when he dosed himself, and he clearly knew what would happen. It wouldn't do any good to punch Hamasaki in the face the moment he entered the interrogation room, but that didn't mean Shoyuta had to like the guy. Self-control is a well-tested skill in a life of conflict. Tokoyami nods. Tsukachi calmly walked through the door to the station and put his trench coat on the chair at his desk. Sorry I'm late, Eraser. I was having lunch with an old friend. Shoyuta grunted in response. Are you ready? Tsukachi nodded and took the file, then led Shoyuta to the room where Hamasaki was waiting. They had to pass through the observation room first, which meant that Shoyuta got a good look at the villain through the glass. He had been expecting the guy to be defiant, considering how strong he'd fought to avoid being arrested. But instead, Hamasaki was pale and jittery. He looked terrified. Whoever his boss is must be a piece of work. Dabi huffs. Tsukachi saw him staring. He's been like that ever since you brought him in. We've tried telling him he's safe here, but he obviously doesn't believe us. It definitely lends credence to your assumption that he actually knows something. Shoyuta nodded and followed Tsukachi through the door. They both sat down at the table opposite Hamasaki, who looked even worse close up. One of his hands was tapping at the table, and a thin sheen of sweat coated his forehead despite the fact that the room was air-conditioned. He had information, that much was certain. The only problem now was getting him to talk. We get to see interview strategies. Todoroki says blankly. That'll be useful. Shinso drawls. Alright, you know why you're here. Tsukachi began. Eraserhead picked you up a few days ago for trigger possession and assaulting a pro-hero, both of which have prison sentences attached. However, the law is willing to be lenient and take time off your sentence if you provide us with useful information. Hamasaki shook his head. I don't know nothing. You fought tooth and nail to avoid answering my questions. Shoyuta said dryly. Who sells you the trigger? I don't know what you're talking about. Hamasaki glanced up at the camera and Shoyuta frowned. Was he scared of dirty cops? That couldn't be. Sure, the trigger operation was growing, but villains had to have a significant amount of power to pull a cop to their side, and that took time. Trigger had only been in Japan for a few years, so he had to be scared of someone else. Shigaraki glanced at Headcase and raised an eyebrow, choosing to remain silent at her nod. We could try to find a way to sweeten the deal. Tsukachi tried. Surely there's something that would make your life more comfortable behind bars. Maybe protective custody? Doesn't matter how comfortable a cell is if you never live to see it. Hamasaki muttered. Harsh. Zero frowns. We have the resources to protect you. Shoyuta said. Whoever's behind Trigger, they can't be powerful enough to reach you in witness protection. Though it's not a guarantee. Midnight sighs. You're underestimating him. Hamasaki said darkly. You think it's just some guys in their mom's basement, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. You don't know what you're dealing with. Shoyuta looked at Tsukachi, who leaned forward. Then tell us. Who are you so afraid of? Hamasaki hesitated, then slammed his mouth shut. No, I'm not saying nothing else. Well then I guess we'll just have to learn the strong way. Tsukachi stood up. Come on, Eraser. This guy obviously doesn't want to tell us anything. It's his fault if we die because we didn't know who to avoid. HeadcaseKiller gasps wow. Shoyuta stood. He wasn't sure Hamasaki was going to be so easily manipulated, but Tsukachi had already made his move and, well, it was worth a try. They certainly weren't going to get anything by bargaining. To his surprise, they had hardly opened the door to leave when Hamasaki spoke up. No one's ever seen him. Shoyuta and Tsukachi shared a glance, then closed the door and sat back down. It's just one man? Tsukachi asked. Behind the whole Trigger operation. That's a tad unbelievable. Momo furrows her brow. Is bigger than you think. Hamasaki said softly. It's not just Trigger, but just stop looking into it. He's too powerful, you'll never stand a chance. So the man behind the Japanese Trigger operation had a fearsome reputation. It wasn't the first time Shoyuta had run into a villain who used his reputation to make sure people didn't fight back. Most of the time those guys were all bark and no bite. They talked up their quirks and connections, but were brained villains at worst, not the strength ones they made themselves out to be. Shigaraki chuckles. Do you have a name? Tsukachi asked. So we know who to avoid. Hamasaki shook his head. Nobody knows his name, but they call him the symbol of evil. All for one, that figures. Yagi Sai should have known. Sensei has done a lot of things. Shigaraki shrugs. Shoyuta narrowed his eyes. The symbol of evil. Like a play on the symbol of peace? No wonder people were so scared of this guy if he made himself out to be all might's equal. He glanced over at Tsukachi, surprised to see fear in his expression as well. He had to know that this symbol of evil was bluffing, right? You've known about All for One for a long time, haven't you? Aizawa turns to Tsukachi. It's strong to keep secrets from me. The shrugs back. Suddenly, a piercing alarm split the air, making all three of them flinch. Sansa came running into the room not a second later, fur on end as he yelled, There's a villain attack right outside, we need all hands on deck. Who would sit in front of a police station? Bakugo shouts annoyed. Shoyuta swore and ran outside, hands already on his capture weapon. There was a small crowd outside and civilians were screaming as they ran away from the dozen or so minor villains that were attacking at random like they were trying to do the greatest damage in the least amount of time. The media vultures were already starting to pull up and film, though they at least had the good sense to stay away from the main fight. Say what you want about the vulture, but they do have common sense. Mike sighs. Sometimes. Aizawa grumbles. The villains were more like thugs, but there were still enough of them to be dangerous if Shoyuta didn't take them down quickly. He activated his quirk and looked at the closest one, some guy with bullets shooting out of his fingers, then quickly wrapped him up and flung him toward the waiting police, then started in on the next one. Wasn't that guy at the USJ? Zero asks. There were a lot of guys at the USJ. Kirishima sighs. Yeah, we'll probably see some before then. Ishido agrees with both boys. Rock Lock had turned up while Shoyuta had been fighting, so he managed to take one of the villains down by locking a rope in place around him. Between the two of them, it only took them another 10 minutes to round up all the villains and get them into police custody. It wouldn't have taken so long if there weren't so many of them. Gangs hadn't been a problem since All Might became number one, so how had so many thugs decided to attack the police station at the same time? They had to be pretty stupid to attack a place that they knew was filled with police. Even if they weren't scared of the cops, pro heroes were always in and out of the station, so why attack? It just didn't make sense. Villains hardly ever think things through. Endeavor rolls his eyes. Hate to agree with a flaming trash can, yet I must. Miruko sighs sarcastically. Slowly they managed to get all the villains off the street and into the holding cells inside the station. There was going to be so much paperwork, thankfully most of it would be done by the police themselves, but still, Shoyuta wasn't looking forward to it. That could wait, however, until he and Tsukachi finished interrogating Hamasaki. The attack had terrible timing. They had just been starting to get useful information when they both had to leave to handle the attack, so hopefully, they'd be able to just pick up where they left off, though Shoyuta wasn't getting his hopes up. It had been a miracle they'd been able to get as much as they had out of the guy, and the attack would probably have spooked him silent. It was annoying. He tracked down Tsukachi and together they made their way to the interrogation room. Shoyuta almost didn't bother looking through the window before entering, but when he did he had to do a double take. He looked at Tsukachi to make sure he wasn't seeing things before they both swore and barged into the empty room. Where the FCK did he go? Oh, did someone move him? This is the same interrogation room, right? He asked. This is where we left him? Yes. Tsukachi looked pale. He was still cuffed to the table when we left. Shoyuta looked more closely at the room. The cuffs were gone as well, which wasn't normal for an escape. Most of the villains who tried would pick the cuffs, then leave them behind so they wouldn't be slowed down by the dead weight. If Shoyuta didn't know better, he'd almost say that Hamasaki had never been there at all. All of one was far-reaching even in hiding as he was. Gran Torino frowned. Tsukachi was already striding back out into the bullpen. Sansa, what happened to the villain we had in interrogation room 6? Shoyuta followed to see Sansa at the front desk looking through the logbook. It says here he was transferred, but that can't be right. The villains were blocking the front entrance, so I suppose they could have taken him out the back, but the attack was taking up almost all of our manpower. The person who transferred him also forgot to sign their name. Forgot. Jiro scoffs. Pull up the security feed, Shoyuta said. The cameras must have caught them leaving. Sansa grimaced. One of the villains' attacks missed their target and hit the power box. We just barely got the lights back on 5 minutes ago, but the station was in a blackout for most of the attack. Convenient. Shinso deadpants. So the cameras weren't recording. Tsukachi clarified. No, sir. Shoyuta looked at Tsukachi and could tell he was thinking the exact same thing. The attack wasn't random and neither was the power outage. The entire thing had been engineered by someone who didn't want Hamasaki to talk to them. Shoyuta had been wrong. Whoever was behind the trigger operation was more powerful than he'd thought possible. And the only lead he had was the symbol of evil. Poor sensei, he's going to have so many headaches. Ajiru sighs. At least it's not our fault this time. Sato comforts. Yet. Koda corrects. The next chapter loads quickly with the quiet murmurs falling silent. Now playing cheat code. Support strategist potential Maijima walked into the staff room after school and made a beeline for the couch, face planting onto it with a groan. Eraser, never let me give you a strong time about your problem children again. Aizawa smirks at the man. Oh, shut up. Aizawa snorted, but didn't even look up from the paper he was grading. Serves you right. You have problem children this year? Yamada grinned as he looked up from his own paperwork. That must be fun. What are they like? Maijima lifted his head off the couch just enough to look him in the eye. You'll know soon enough. They've decided to use one of your students as an extra credit project. Nedzu hid his smile behind his teacup, knowing full well exactly which students Maijima was talking about. Of course, he hadn't had a chance to peek at the cameras for Class 1F just yet. He still had a school to run after all, but Midoriya and his friend Hatsum had so much chaotic potential that there was little chance that Maijima was talking about anyone else. The only question now was which student had they chosen as their victim. I don't like that he called me a victim. Shinso deadpants. To be fair, I can be a bit much. Izuku shrugs. And I'm me. Mei agrees. I'm the homeroom teacher for 1C. Yamada said slowly. What would a couple of support course students want with a gen ed kid? Mike chuckles at his other self. You'll see. Maijima sighed in exhaustion and sat up. They've decided that one of your kids is getting into the hero course and that they're helping him do it. Can they even do that? Snipe asked. They can try. Nedzu grins. There's nothing in the rules against it, Nedzu said cheerfully. It might have taken a few loopholes if they were teachers, but since they're all students, then they're simply helping their friend, correct? Nedzu's on board. We're doomed. Kaminari sighs. Of course, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Maijima muttered. You do know this is your fault, right? If it was just Hatsum, I could handle it. I've had plenty of students like her in the past, but whenever she's combined with your protege. Wait, you have a protege? Yamada yelled, making Aizawa finally look up from his papers to cancel his quirk. Not that Yamada noticed or even cared. You never take personal students. What even is this kid? A hellspawn probably. Aizawa said. He has to be if he caught the rat's attention. Hey, Izuku pouts. You know it's true, problem child. Aizawa deadpants. Nedzu simply smiled and let his faculty form their own opinions. Many of them already knew about Midoriya and some had even met him, but the few who hadn't were all listening to the conversation with a mixture of curiosity and fear. All Might in particular looked vaguely terrified after the chat that Nedzu had with him the other day. Not that the scolding had been undeserved, of course, but it meant that he was probably a bit more primed to be scared of Midoriya's potential and of Nedzu's interest in him. He looks like he's had the fear of God has been put into him. All Might winces at his other self. Good. Torino says evenly. Nedzu was honestly more disappointed that All Might had forgotten about Midoriya after accidentally showing him his weakness than he was about the whole telling him not to be a hero thing. Nedzu was still a bit upset since heroism had apparently been Midoriya's lifelong dream, but the fact was that he was quirkless. As sad and terrible as it was, Nedzu couldn't pretend that Midoriya wouldn't be at a distinct natural disadvantage not just in combat, but in the flashy popularity contest that defined the industry. It probably didn't matter which hero he had asked, they probably would have given the same answer, so at least All Might had tried to be polite about it. I really did, still terrible to say, but I wasn't malicious. All Might agrees. Forgetting about the boy, however, was a much more serious offense. If Midoriya had secretly been a villain or had taken All Might's advice badly, it could have been disastrous for all of Japan. Even if All Might had been 100% certain that Midoriya would never use his weakness against him, the boy's knowledge of it would make him an appetizing target for the many villains that had a vendetta against the number one hero. By not communicating the encounter to anyone, not even Tsukachi, All Might had put not only himself but also an innocent civilian in danger, which was idiotic no matter what rank he held. Nedzu would have to keep an eye on him while he was at UA to make sure he didn't endanger a student like that again. Both Viridian and Mastermind can attest to such points. Tokoyami rumbles. This brought Nedzu to his next concern, which was the heroics exercise he had observed that afternoon. It had been decent, but All Might obviously hadn't known when it was appropriate to stop a match to prevent undue harm. Teaching students combat was tricky since they obviously didn't yet know how much force was appropriate for certain situations. Some tended to use too little, so afraid of causing harm that they limited their own effectiveness, while others like young Bakugo tended to go overboard and use too much. It was a strong line to balance, especially for someone like All Might who was perfectly capable of punching away all of his problems, but it was one of the most important things that their students would learn over the course of their 3 years there, which meant that it was something that All Might would need to improve on sooner rather than later. Thankfully, the other teachers would be able to pick up the slack. I appreciate it. All Might informs his co-workers. Speaking of the other teachers, honestly, as much as I hate to admit a man is right, Kiyama drawled, I think Aizawa might be right about this one. It's the green-haired one, right, Nedzu? Midoriya? Nedzu nodded and gestured for her to continue as the rest of the teachers leaned forward slightly in anticipation and curiosity. When I showed up to teach today, the kid was leading his classmates in a revenge plot against the hero students. Kiyama elked her lips and smiled. It was delicious. Midnight approved. May cackles. Nedzu didn't know whether to be proud, concerned, excited, or angry, so he settled on gathering more information before making that decision. Do you know which student? Kiyama shrugged, not quite sure. I do know he's a first year and apparently bullied the poor boy. I love their idea of revenge, though the mischievous little imps are going to do a bunch of subtle things to make the kid miserable, so just look for which of the first years encounters more than his fair share of daily frustrations and you'll have your target. That's going to be our problem too. Ajaru sighs. There were easier ways to find the child if one just hacked into the right records. If all went well, as it undoubtedly would, Nedzu would have this boy's name by the end of the night, and he was a bully, you said? Nedzu sir? All Might said hesitantly. Please tell me that you're going to stop this rather than joining in. You poor naive fool. All Might looks on with pity. All Might visibly gulped at the sharp smile Nedzu gave him. Now, All Might, one of the goals of a teacher is to help one's students accomplish their goals. What kind of a teacher would I be if I didn't give Midoriya any assistance? This is gold. Dabi chuckles with a menacing grin. But, don't bother. Aizawa said. That kind of pettiness is right up Nedzu's alley, so at least he's only going to be taking it out on one brat rather than the whole of humanity. The only thing he'll have to worry about is the conspiracy theorist trying to accuse the kid of being his secret love child or something. Izuku snorts, turning to Todoroki just in time to see a quickly hidden scowl. So Yamada grinned. I get to meet the little listener? Which of my students has he adopted? I think Midoriya said his name is Shinso. Paoloda sighed. He has a brainwashing quirk. A good choice, I approve, Nedzu chirped. He remembered Shinso from the exams, of course. It was a shame that he didn't get enough points, but despite his and Aizawa's best efforts, the school board had shot down every single one of the alternate exam ideas they had proposed, leaving Shinso in general education until he was able to prove himself during the sports festival. Demon quirkist a-holes. Shinso growls. Brainwashing? Aizawa asked. It's an intriguing quirk, I can see why Midoriya was drawn to it, Nedzu chirped. Young Shinso can control anyone provided that they answer one of his questions. And of course it's useless against robots. Aizawa muttered and dragged a hand down his face. Please tell your protege not to only focus on the kid's quirk. With a drawback like that, he'll have to be able to fight without it. Way ahead of you. Izuku grins. Oh, you don't have to worry about that. Nedzu dismissed. I do believe that Midoriya would be the last person to limit a person based entirely on their quirk. Obviously. Aizawa grins. Kiyama asked, and why is that? There was a moment of tense silence before All Might, to Nedzu's surprise, answered, because he's quirkless. That explains it. Aizawa said after a moment. If he caught your attention, he obviously doesn't let it limit him. Good. Now let's see if the other problem child sees it the same way. If I'm not an idiot. Shansu grumble. Good thing you're not. Uraraka chirps. The rest of the squad throws in their 2 cents as the next chapter loads. Now playing Shadows. The horror movie hero's potential. It felt like Kaken was getting worse. Maybe Izuku was imagining it, but ever since he'd gotten captured by the sludge villain, Kaken was about twice as mean as he had been. He must be compensating for being caught as the victim and trying to regain either a sense of control or a sense of power, but in the end, it didn't matter what had led to the change, it just mattered that Izuku stayed out of his attack radius as much as humanly possible. Bakugo groans. That wasn't an option during class, unfortunately, especially since most of his teachers would turn a blind eye to Izuku getting tripped, burned, or hurt if it meant that Kaken wouldn't interrupt class. But after class was when the worst beatings happened anyway, so if he could just stay out of sight for long enough for Kaken to leave, then Izuku could go hang out with Shinso at the park. He just had to stay out of sight. Easier said than done. Izuku sighs. I thought you said Bakugo never went so far as to hunt you down. Uraraka says, worried. The battle trial. He responds. She nods her head in understanding. Izuku looked around for somewhere to hide. Inside a locker would be fine if he had a guarantee that he could get out, but if the locker latched and he got trapped, then it would defeat the whole purpose of hiding in the first place. Empty classrooms weren't a safe bet because Kaken would send his lackeys to check those, and if he tried going to a teacher it would just make things worse. If only there were some way to give himself an advantage. And take the high ground? Izuku almost stopped in his tracks as it hit him. Take the high ground. Sure, Katsuki could easily reach him with his explosions, but that was only if he thought to look up. Please don't look up. Ishido pleads. Izuku sped up and skidded around the corner, making a beeline for the trophy case. Kaken had won pretty much every award the school offered, so his name and face were featured multiple times, while Izuku may as well not be a student. That didn't matter though. What mattered was that the case didn't go all the way to the ceiling. There was about a foot of space on top with a little decorative lip along the edge of the case that should be enough to mostly hide him if he laid down completely flat. Let's hope it hides him. Audrey comments. Izuku grabbed a chair from an empty classroom and used it to try and scramble up the side of the case, accidentally kicking it aside as he did. It took all of his strength to get up on top of it, but he finally managed it with a grunt. It was strong to catch his breath with all the dust, so he covered his mouth and did his best to muffle how strong he was panting. This entire plan would be for nothing if Kaken heard him and found his hiding place. This is not going to work. Jiro cringes. It was only a few seconds after Izuku had settled in that Kaken and a couple of their other classmates rounded the corner. Kaken had a murderous expression on his face as he looked down the hallway in both directions. You extras split up and find that demon nerd. I'm gonna take a look around here. His lackeys nodded and one took off in either direction while Kaken started looking around. He peeked his head in each of the other classrooms and Izuku had to fight off the disappointment when he didn't look at any of them for more than a few seconds. Then Kaken saw the chair on the floor and his eyes narrowed. Oh, sit. Toga whispers. Izuku couldn't help himself as he started trembling. If Kaken found him, was there anything he could even do? If he was just stronger, then he could have gotten up quicker and not had to use the chair. He shouldn't have left any evidence that Kaken could use to find him hiding. Had seemed like the perfect plan at the time, but if it didn't work, then it would just make everything worse. He needed to get better at thinking ahead and strategizing for every possibility, not just the one he hoped would happen. You'll learn quick, you always do, Todoroki assures. Stupid dust. If he was going to be hiding in places like this frequently, he'd need to start carrying around a mask. Kaken was getting closer and Izuku clamped his hands over his mouth again as he felt a sneeze coming on. He hated this. He hated being so terrified. And as much as he hated it, what made it even worse was that Kaken didn't even know what it was like. With the exception of the sludge villain, he'd never been the victim. He didn't know what it was like to live in fear like Izuku did. Hiss right in the heart. His mind was racing through all the research he'd done since meeting Shinso, and Izuku knew that there were 1.5 million strategies that he could use, but if he tried them and failed then it would just make Kaken even angrier than he was right now. Plus there was the fact that Izuku was pretty sure that Kaken's fight or flight response was mostly geared toward fight, which meant that a fake-out strategy wasn't going to work here like it did with the sludge villain. What was he supposed to do? Kaken's eyes slid from the chair to the trophy case to Izuku on top. He gulped. Too late. There you are, Deku. Kaken smirked. Found you. This is my own personal hell. Bakugo scowls. Kyoko wasn't quite sure what to think of her new teacher. Dad was always so gung-ho about taking advantage of new opportunities and never saying no to an adventure, but he was also impulsive and had a habit of not thinking things through all the way. So yeah, Dad saw absolutely nothing sketchy about some guy who supposedly worked for All Might offering to train her, but Kyoko was obviously picking up more than a few red flags that merited bringing pepper spray along to her first training session. If Tashinori Yagi hadn't been listed as an employee on All Might's website, she wouldn't have even shown up at all, but a little extra training from someone who actually knew the hero industry would be extremely valuable, so even though she was still pretty sure he was lying about something, she had decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. For now. Izuku starts laughing hysterically while Jiro stares at the screen in abject horror. Dagabah Municipal Bikshpar. When Yagi had told her the meeting place she'd been expecting more, well, just more. The park, if she could even call it that, was so disused that people had started using it as a public dump site, and if there had ever been a playground anywhere sound here, it had long since been buried beneath literal mountains of trash. It's not like that anymore. Momo says curious. Yagi of course blended right in, so it took her a minute to realize that he'd beaten her there and was already standing on the boardwalk looking out over the ocean. Kyoko wrinkled her nose and winced at every minuscule creak the wood made as she started picking her way to him. No offense, but this perfect training ground you picked is kind of a mess. For now. Izuku says to himself, calming down from his hysterics. Yagi jumped and gave her a sheepish smile. Oh, young Jiro, I didn't see you there. Clearly. Aizawa rolls his eyes. Jiro gave him a skeptical look. So, are we gonna train or what? Yes, of course. Yagi snapped into action and started making his way back to the beach with much less care than she had taken. Most likely because he couldn't hear every concerning creak the wood made as they put weight on it, but they somehow managed to reach the sand without the boardwalk collapsing underneath them. Kyoko breathed a sigh of relief. This was definitely turning out to be an adventure. That's sketchy as shit. Kaminari remarks with concern. So, young Jiro, Yagi began, leading her through the piles of trash. I must admit that I haven't been completely honest with you. His form started to shift and Kyoko cursed under her breath and grabbed the can of pepper spray in her pocket. Go on an adventure, Dad said. It'll be a great opportunity, he said. Kyoko swore to God if she got murdered she was going to haunt her father for the rest of his miserable life. She had no idea what kind of quirk this guy had, but from the shift in size, it was most likely some kind of monster quirk. She wasn't equipped to fight that. What could she do? Wait, please wait, Jiro shouts at her other self while Izuku is once again losing his sit. Yagi had already lured her out of sight of the street, but they were still close enough that if she pepper sprayed him and bolted she might just be able to get away before he recovered. She braced her feet and as soon as the smoke had cleared enough for her to tell where the creature's eyes were, she fired. Bullseye. New Jiro wails as Momo pats her on the back. The smoke surrounding Yagi finished clearing and Kyoka's eyes widened as she realized just who exactly she had just pepper-sprayed right in the eyes right as he let out a strangled cry and collapsed back into his skeletal form with a puff of steam. All Might? If one were to look at where the man in question is sitting, one would see the man burying his face in his hands as those around him either laugh or stare in disbelief. Yes? All Might coughed up a small amount of BLD, making Kyoka feel even worse, too. Well, I knew you were, strong enough for my quirk. Where's some phone here? Call recovery girl. Jiro was shaking as she grabbed his phone out of his hand and searched through the contacts. Thankfully, there weren't that many and recovery girl was already near the top of his recent calls. Hello? I think I might have just attacked the #1 hero. Sorry? Don't apologize for that, Toga exclaimed. It's his own DMN fault for isolating you like that. Dabi agrees. You know you f'd up when twice cuts and the villains criticize your sit. Hitoshi was trying really strong to not feel betrayed. After going over to Midoriya's house, he'd thought that they were at least partners if not friends, but here he was. At the meeting place. Alone. Midoriya really didn't strike him as the type of guy to be late, so at this point, it was probably safe to assume that he wasn't showing up at all. Maybe he'd wanted to show up and his mom just hadn't let him? That was probably just wishful thinking. It would have been nice if Midoriya still wanted to hang out with him, but he'd probably come to his senses and realized that the whole using fear as a weapon and being associated with someone with a villain's quirk was kind of a bad idea in the first place. Even if it ended up working, it was still a long shot. Shinso winces or he was held up by a bully. Hitoshi sighed and jumped off the swing he'd been sitting on. He might as well go home and do his homework. He needed to at least make sure he could pass the Gen Ed exam once it was time to apply to UA. He shouldn't have gotten his hopes up. Wait, no, don't go, May demands. Shinso Midoriya's voice made him stop in his tracks. Sorry I'm late, I got held up, but I'm here now. Hitoshi looked Midoriya up and down. He was slightly favoring one ankle and his uniform was singed and torn in several places. Plus, Hitoshi was fairly certain that those were bandages peeking out from his sleeves. Held up by who? Muggers? Good guess, but no. Zero size. No. Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck. Just some bullies. I really wish I could just make them go away. I know how, right? But all the study we've done is just in theory. I've never really had a chance to practice being scary, you know? How are they gonna pull that off? Sato asks. And I've only ever practiced being less scary. Hitoshi nodded in understanding. So how are we gonna do about that? Shinso sits up a little straighter in interest. There's gotta be some way for us to practice. Midoriya had started muttering to himself, so Hitoshi just let him talk and tried to catch as much as possible. There are haunted houses, but while those might be helpful, they probably won't hire kids our age. Wait, aren't there companies that provide civilians for rescue simulations and stuff for heroes in training? I wonder if there are opportunities like that for fake villains. That would be excellent training. Netsu agrees. If there is, that'd probably be the best. Hitoshi cut in. The point is to beat the villains at their own game, right? So pretending to be villains would probably be a pretty effective way to practice. To defend the light by embracing the shadows shall be a fascinating undertaking. Tokoyami says with curiosity. Midoriya smiled and pulled out his phone. Okay, let's start there. We'll probably need a lot more physical training too and maybe parkour? It seems like it'll be really useful to be able to beat villains in mobility and, he kinda tried hiding on top of a display case and rolled my ankle jumping down. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. Was this before or after you got beat up? Midoriya grimaced. Before. And that reminds me we should probably learn to fight. Yeah. Hitoshi nodded. Yeah, we should probably get on that. Yeah, you should. Bakugo growls in frustration. Headcase, noticing the lack of discussion, quickly starts the next episode. Deku? I think he's some pro UA. Izuku took a deep breath before stepping through the front gates of UA. He was finally here. He hunched his shoulders slightly, trying to avoid as many other students as possible as he made his way to the main building. Maybe that nice girl Yaoyorozu from the entrance exam would be in his class? Maybe Kaken wouldn't be? Izuku shook his head. He shouldn't get his hopes up. You thought that in our world too, didn't you? Todoroki turns to Izuku. Yeah, I did try to avoid Kaken. Izuku nods. As he climbed the front steps, he fiddled with the tie that he just hadn't managed to get right before coming to school today. Unfortunately, with his eyes busy looking at his neck, he didn't manage to see the last step. What a way to begin his first day at UA. Deyavo. Izuku tsukutsuklas. Izuku tried to maneuver his momentum into a roll like Joke always told him to do if he was falling on a parkour run, but instead of the familiar feeling of a cement landing, he found himself turning over and over again in midair. Oops. Uraraka giggles. Oh, I am so sorry, a girl's voice said. I was just trying to catch you using my quirk because I didn't think falling on the first day of school was a good omen. I'm so sorry. I've messed everything up. God, that's adorable. Hagikure-ku's. Izuku had now managed to right himself and was floating in midair, sitting cross-legged and smiling at the trippy feeling of hovering several feet above the ground. You have some sort of anti-gravity quirk, right? That's so cool. Typical. Bakugo snorts. She looked at him with wide eyes. You don't mind? Does he ever? Tsu teases. Izuku shook his head. I'm a little dizzy, but otherwise this is fun. You have such an awesome quirk. We should have an anti-gravity party. Ishido schemes. The girl smiled and pressed her fingers together, and Izuku felt his gravity suddenly return as he landed in a crouch. Must be some kind of 5-point contact quirk. My name is Ochako Uraraka, she said as Izuku stood and brushed himself off. What's your name? Izuku Midoriya. Izuku was thankful that being around Joke and her incessant flirting had somewhat desensitized him to talking to women, otherwise he would be a mess right now. Where are you headed? What class are you in? Wait, Uraraka gasped. Did you even say anything when we first met? Izuku blushed. In my defense, you are literally the first friend I've had since Kaken turned on me when we were 5. Uraraka giggles a bit. Yeah, okay, I guess that's fair. Uraraka smiled. Class 1A. I really only passed the exam by the skin of my teeth. That 0-pointer was something else, wasn't it? Izuku chokes on his breath. Yep. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck as they started walking. Actually, I wouldn't know. I was admitted on recommendation, so our exams were a little different. You guys fought robots, right? Yep. That's right. We did. Uraraka nodded. Yep, it was insane. There were different sizes and strengths of robots, all worth different point values, but then there was this 0-point robot. You'd think it'd be tiny, right? Just something to trip over and get in the way, but it was the size of some of the buildings. I got trapped under some rubble and had already gone over my quirk's limits. She shuddered. I managed to scrounge up just enough strength to use my quirk to escape and run away before it crushed me, but I ended up passing out for about 5 hours after the exam. The lecture Recovery Girl gave me was almost as scary as the 0-pointer. Good. Recovery Girl smiles. Izuku laughed. Yeah, she can be pretty intimidating when people don't take care of themselves. I really never want to get on her bad side. Izuku coughs. They kept chatting idly as they tried to find the 1A classroom without getting lost. They got there a few minutes before the bell and Uraraka opened the giant door easily, probably using her quirk to help. She walked in without hesitation, but Izuku stood frozen by the door. It's the first day and you're already scuffing up school property, you cretin, you're kidding me, right? Kaken smirked. Did your old school put a stick up your butt or were you just born that way? That's a look of dread if I've ever seen one. Shinso snarks. Can you blame me? Izuku defends. Ida sighed. Let's start over. My name is Tenya Ida and I went to semi-private. Semi-ha. Kaken leaned forward threateningly. You must think you're better than. I'm gonna have fun putting you in your place. Bakugo glares at the screen as his eye twitches. Izuku gulped. He knew exactly how terrible it was to have Kaken have to put you in your place. He seriously felt bad for Ida. Sensei will stop him. Shoji nods. Midoriya Yaoyorozu waved to him from where she was talking to the ice quirk user from the recommendation exam. It's so awesome you made it, and did you end up having to take the normal exam as well? No, he didn't. Ida said. At least I didn't see him there. Midoriya stood frozen from all the attention, but smiled hesitantly at Yaoyorozu. No, I got in on my first try. It's good to see all of you again. What the FCK are you doing here, Deku? Kaken growled. Don't set the school on fire. Aizawa groans. Izuku flinched at Kaken's tone, but before he could respond, Ida was already speaking. Oh, you're the famous Dekuzan? He bowed deeply. My brother Tensei speaks very highly of you. Tensei? Izuku tilted his head in confusion. He thought for a minute. Did he know a Tensei that was related to Ida? A hero maybe? Wait, didn't he think Ida looked kinda like a pro at the entrance exam? What was the nickname he'd given him? Mini Ingenium. Oh, Ingenium. Izuku laughed. Yeah, he's fun to talk to. I tend to work more with his underground sidekicks than I do with him, though. Kaken's scowl deepened. My brother is rather busy. Ida admits. Shuta's normal cup of morning coffee never seemed to be enough on the first day of school. Already, he'd had to stop 4 third-year students from pranking the first years, and had to deal with several students accusing him of being lost and wandering into UA by mistake. Yes, he knew he looked like a hobo, but come on, UA's security measures wouldn't allow a random homeless person to just walk and snort. Ha, I'm not laughing. That's Rich. He was almost at his classroom. Time to see how quickly this batch of newcomers would notice him. He was just about to grab his sleeping bag when he heard a series of small explosions coming from his class. What the FCK are you talking about, Deku? A loud voice screamed, and Shoyuta suddenly understood exactly what Deku had meant when he said he could just tell who was using his name as an insult. Why would actual pro heroes ever want to associate with a quirkless loser like you? Just who do you think you are? Because he has a decent heart and a kick-ass mind, May snaps back. Please Bakugo, such behavior is unbecoming of UA students. Shut up, Four Eyes, so creative. Ishido draws out sarcastically. Please, Kaken, Deku said. Just calm down. Shoyuta didn't wait for his students to notice him as he normally did on the first day of school. Instead, he slammed the door open with his quirk already activated and a glare strong enough to kill. Deku was hunching in on himself like he always did when he was feeling anxious, and a blonde boy was towering over him, hands still smoking from the use of his quirk only moments before. He was staring at his hands in confusion as the rest of the class looked on in shock. Go Sensei, HeadcaseKiller cheers. If this is how you think it is appropriate to treat your fellow students, Shoyuta said, then maybe you shouldn't be at UA at all. Yes, no, do it, you'll make it worse. Deku looked up at him and shook his head frantically, pleading with his eyes for him not to expel the boy, Katsuki Bakugo, if Shoyuta remembered correctly from the class role he'd been given. Shoyuta grit his teeth. On the one hand, this kid was the reason that Deku would never truly realize how talented he was and had bullied him for at least a decade. On the other hand, if Shoyuta expelled the brat now, Deku would blame himself for his expulsion, which wouldn't be healthy. He's still on thin ice. Aizawa growls. Shoyuta took a deep breath and released his quirk. He would give the brat until the end of the day. Hopefully by then Bakugo would have given him a concrete reason for expulsion and he could talk to Nezu. He'd still probably have to talk to Deku and try to prevent him from blaming himself, but that would be more doable if Shoyuta had a specific instance that day to point to. You're scheming against him. Midnight grins. It's only logical. He waves her off. Everyone in your seats. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated, nor will wasting time. He strode to the front of the class. Rational students would understand that. Bakugo sneered, and just who the FCK are you? Bakugo facepalms, an adult at UA as in a pro hero and one of your teachers. Shoyuta glared at him, but it was Deku who answered, this is Eraserhead, he's our teacher. Shoyuta glanced at him softly, problem child, when we're at school you can just call me Aizawa-sensei. He looked over at the rest of his students. For the rest of you who don't know me, my name is Shoyuta Aizawa, otherwise known as the pro hero Eraserhead. Deku knows me because we've worked together before. You'll probably find that's a pattern with him. Anyway, let's stop wasting time and just get to it. He pulled out his sleeping bag and retrieved a gym uniform from inside. The drama of that reveal had probably been lost since he didn't arrive to class bundled up, but oh well. Put these on and head outside. We'll start with a quirk assessment test. Didn't cheat code mention something like that? Toga asks. I think so. Twice answers, who cares? He then turned on his heel and walked out of the classroom and down the hall, not waiting for the students to catch up. So we get to see why the Great 1A missed orientation. Monoma snarks. Izuku shook his head and smiled as Aizawa explained that they couldn't waste time on pointless ceremonies. Classic eraser. He resisted the urge to chuckle when he saw the other students' confused and terrified faces. They obviously hadn't seen the guy give a stray cat half a sandwich to lure it into his capture weapon so he could take it to the vet. Oh, so cute, sensei. Aizawa is not blushing. You have no proof. Here at UA we're not tethered to traditions. That means I get to run my class however I see fit. You've never gotten to use your quirks in physical exams before, that's just not rational. Bakugo, Izuku hoped he was imagining how his teacher's voice was laced with hatred. You got the most points on the entrance exam. What was your farthest distance throw with a soft in middle school? And so it begins. Kaminari whispers. 67 meters. Kaken's eyes were lit with a challenge. Try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa handed Kaken an electric soft and motioned for him to stand in a circle that was painted on the field. Anything goes, just stay in the circle. Kaken smirked. All right, you asked for it. He wound up letting it loose with a scream and an explosion die. Izuku's eyes widened. He'd known Kaken was powerful, but that was something else. All of you need to know your maximum capabilities, Aizawa drawled. His phone beeped as they landed and he showed the screen to the students, looking slightly disappointed. 705. 2 meters. Is the most rational way of figuring out your potential. So bitter. Midnight teases. Like you be any better. Aizawa snarks back. No. She agrees, but I'm me and you're you. Her grin makes him roll his eyes. Whoa, I want to go. A lively student with pink hair and skin exclaimed. That looks like fun. Dun do you? And Ishido chuckles at her other self's mistake. Yeah, another boy said, we can use our quirks as much as we want fun? Aizawa said seriously, idiots. Today you'll compete in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes last has none and will be expelled immediately. Wait, he actually did that? Kendo exclaims. I thought it was just a rumor. Away's claims. The students gasped and Izuku covered his mouth with his hands to hide his smile. Aizawa was trying to scare them into doing their best and making sure they took the exercise seriously. If the last place could still prove they had potential, Aizawa wouldn't expel them, but they didn't know that. And we proved ourselves. Jiro grins. I can't believe I truly thought he was bluffing. Momo sighs. Izuku was tapped on the shoulder by an invisible hand and he looked over to see a floating uniform. Deku, right? You knew Aizawa-sensei before. Is he really serious about this? Izuku carefully schooled his expression and shrugged. He has the highest expulsion rate of any teacher in the history of UA. He doesn't have any patience for students with zero potential. That didn't answer the question. Todoroki deadpants. Yaoyorozu looked at him oddly with one eyebrow raised. Apparently, she'd caught on to the fact that he hadn't really answered the question. He smiled slightly and winked and she nodded and returned the smile. They both turned to look at Aizawa-sensei again. Conspirators. Tokoyami whispers. Wait a minute, Ribbit. A girl with green hair raised her hand. Bakugo implied earlier that Deku is quirkless. How is it fair to have all of us use our quirks when he won't be able to? Seriously? Hagekure huffs. Izuku curled in on himself. He'd hoped to keep his quirklessness a secret for a while longer, but now they were all going to think he didn't have any right to be in the hero course, especially if he managed to come in last on the assessment test. And there's the anxiety. Shinso sighs. Aizawa only smiled. Hagekure, the invisible uniform, stood up a little straighter. Is your quirk going to help you run faster? Nope, the girl is quick to chime in. No, Aizawa-sensei. He nodded. And Mineta, is your quirk going to help you throw farther? No. The boy huffs. A short boy with purple S for hair shook his head. You'll all realize that while quirks are helpful and influence your potential, they are not everything and will not be useful for every situation. You have to train both your body and your mind to make up for that. I personally do not think that Deku will get last place even if the rest of you use your quirks, but that is neither here nor there. His strengths lie in his mind. Therefore, in the end there will be a 9th test. Deku will try to create a strategy for you as a class to take me down. If this strategy works, he will be proven to have potential, even if he comes in last in the physical exams. In addition, if any of you do poorly in the physical exams, this strategy exercise will be your last chance to prove to me that it's no mistake that you're here. Understand? So cool, we can do it, won't let you down. The students nodded and glanced at Izuku in pity, apparently already writing him off. There was no way that a group of students would be able to defeat a pro. Izuku simply ignored the stares. He wasn't planning on getting last in the physical tests. Aizawa wanted the students to go all out, so that was what he'd get. Make them eat their pity, show 'em up, you fools. Deku Deku Deku. The chant spreads as Headcase loads the next chapter. Deku 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 Deku. Headcase claps for attention. Let the next chapter begin. Now playing Mastermind. Strategist for Hire. Mastermind versus Stain. Ida shielded his head as a katana came out of nowhere, blocking his kick, removing his helmet and knocking him to the ground. This is no place for a child. Ida stood and let Stain see the rage in his eyes. BLD red scarf, knives all over your body. You're Stain, the hero killer. I've been looking for you, but I didn't think I'd find you so soon. That's what you won't tell us about Hosu? Uraraka turns on Ida. You went after Stain? Mei cries. Sue stares him down as Shinso gapes. And what do you two have to do with this? Uraraka rounds on Izuku and Shoto. We signed NDAs, we can't talk about it. Izuku defends. But Headcase can. Todoroki adds. All eyes turn to Headcase as she smiles smugly, glancing at Endeavor, relishing the resigned dread on the man's face. The hero killer, Stain, was defeated by Midoriya, Izuku, Todoroki, Shoto, and Ida Tenya. However, she pauses, ensuring no one interrupts her before continuing. As they were not licensed at the time, they would have faced a vigilantism charge if they did not give the credit to. She grins Endeavor. Motherfucker, why him? Damn it. Stain leveled his katana at Ida's face. Your eyes are searing with vengeance. Be careful what you say next, for even someone your age could be my target. Ida clenched his fists as rage and hatred clenched his heart. Are you saying I'm not even a threat to you? He met Stain's eyes. My brother is a hero who you attacked. He was the best older brother anyone could ask for. I have come to stop you because he can't anymore. I'm going to make sure you remember my name for as long as you live. I am Ingenium and I will defeat you. Look, I know the whole avenging angel thing is a big no-no, but that was a line. Kaminari grins. Then so be it, Stain said. Die. Ida leveled a kick at the hero killer, who dodged and returned with a kick of his own, knocking Ida to the ground. Before he could even think to move again, Stain's katana was buried in his arm. Izuku, he'll be okay, right? So you're Ingenium's brother. You don't deserve to call yourselves heroes. You're fakes, the both of you. Ida grit his teeth. My brother was someone people looked up to. Now he'll never work as a pro hero again. You had no right to take that away from him. I won't forgive you. I'll kill you. Anyone else finds it surreal that the rule-abiding Ida was the one to attempt murder? Mike asks. His rigid personality may be the very reason why it happened. Hound dog sighs. Shouldn't you be worried about saving that guy? Stain pointed and Ida followed his finger to see Prohero Native slumped against the wall of the alley. Ida's stomach sank. He hadn't even realized Native was there. I am ashamed of my actions back then. Ida says solemnly. So busy with your grudge, you forgot all about him, right? You planned on using your quirk only for your own selfish longing for revenge. You're about as far from being a hero as I can imagine. Stain slid his katana from Ida's shoulder and elked it, and that's why you'll die tonight. Ida couldn't move. He couldn't think. What would his parents think? What would Tensei think? They'd be so disappointed and he wouldn't even be able to apologize. Hot tears fell on the concrete. How could he have been so stupid? Anger makes you do stupid things. Todoroki comforts. Goodbye, child. May your death bring about a better world. Ida closed his eyes and waited for the sharp bite of the katana, but it didn't come. Are we gonna watch a hero kid bleed out? Mount Lady says in horror. Because watching our friends and even ourselves die wasn't bad enough. Kamui growls. Hello again, hero killer. Fancy seeing you here. Yes, distract Stain so Ida can get away. Uraraka cheers. Mastermind. Stain pointed his katana at the newcomer. Ida tried to look but could just barely see dark red boots standing behind Stain. So nice of you to come. My blade hungers for the BLD of the BSTRD that killed All Might. Did you know that the girl who taught me how to fight loves you? Mastermind asked idly. When I told her I was killing you tonight, she was so excited. Told me to bring her a vial of your BLD. Mastermind fixed Stain with a green-eyed stare. I don't intend to break my promise. Okay, I've known you for months, don't know why I'm surprised. Dabi chuckles. Do you two just not care that I hate the whole reason you joined? Shigaraki asks. I just want to kill Endeavor. Dabi says bluntly. The only one who actually cares about Stain's goals is Spinner and he's not here. Toga giggled. Ida didn't think that was how love worked at all, but he figured that whoever taught Mastermind to fight must be as crazy as he was, so it was best not to question it. He tried to move his fingers but couldn't. Was this how Tensei had felt when he woke up and couldn't move his legs? Many people wince at that. Mastermind launched himself at Stain, a long knife in each hand. Stain sliced down with his katana, intending to lodge it in his opponent's shoulder, but Mastermind twisted out of the way at the last second, slashing Stain across the ribs. Stain hissed as the blade snuck between the metal plating on his suit and left a long gash. You have excellent aim, Mastermind. He smiled. Unfortunately, I have been at this much longer than you have. He ran forward again with his katana. This time, when Mastermind dodged, he kneed him in the stomach and then used a knife he had hidden in his other hand to slash at Mastermind's arm. He brought the blade to his mouth, only to look at the clean metal with confusion. A word of advice, Mastermind laughed. When planning to fight a BLD quirk user, invest in excellent armor. Snap. Dabi grins. Before Ida could blink, Mastermind was pushing Stain back and he had to bite back a groan as Stain stepped on him before launching forward again. The two had seemingly forgotten about him in their haste to kill each other, and Ida didn't think it would be wise to remind them he was still there, frozen on the ground. Smart move. Shinso elbowed Ida lightly. This time Mastermind blocked the katana with his knives and twisted, disarming Stain and sending the sword skittering further down the alley. Stain didn't even look toward his fallen blade, instead pulling a pair of hunting knives from his belt and running forward again. So many knives. Todoroki shook his head with a sigh. Ida flinched as another knife came sailing toward him and flew over his head. He flinched. Ida tried to stamp down on his growing hope as he thought about moving his fingers, and they obeyed him. He could move again. He looked to where Stain and Mastermind were fighting further down the alley, and for one brief moment, he considered taking advantage of Stain's distraction and working with Mastermind to bring him down. He shook his head and slowly stood up. No. It had been a stupid decision to come after Stain in the first place, and if the hero killer had taken him down so quickly, what would he do if both Stain and Mastermind decided to kill him? Both had taken down heroes far more experienced than he was. He wouldn't stand a chance. He wouldn't do that to his family. Not again. Thank goodness. Momo sighs. Ida sneaked from the alley as quietly as he could before revving up his engines. He had to find Manuel. That could have been worse. Izuku mumbles. Don't jinx it, there are 4 other stories to see this go so many different ways. Shinso warns. Don't remind me. Ida groans. Is that all you got? Izuku taunted as he stabbed Stain again. I can see why I've killed so many more heroes than you. It's so strong to hear him brag. Mike winced. It's just not him, and yet it is. Midnight groaned. You're the worst kind of person on this earth, Stain growled. You let other people do your dirty work and then you take all the credit. You take joy in senseless death and violence with no regard for your effect on society. Hypocrite. Cero grumbles. Oh, I understand my effect on society, all right. Izuku said as he blocked another throwing knife. I understand that they fear me, that they think I'm powerful. That the kid they all thought was weak is stronger than all the rest of them. You tell him show some respect. So it's revenge you're after, is it? Stain panted as he pulled another knife from its sheath. You're just as bad as that kid I'll kill later. He would have hunted me down, good to know. Ida said, suddenly pale. Revenge? No, I'm afraid it's simpler than that. Izuku replied. Society is what made me who I am. They tossed me aside and ignored my pain. They agreed that I was only good for being abused and hated, so guess what? It's my turn to be powerful. I get it, but it still sucks. Sato sighs. Stain rushed at him with both knives, trying to draw BLD from the exposed skin on his face, but Izuku simply bent over and stabbed both his knives into Stain's gut before backing away. He hit an artery. Aizawa informed. I'll kill you for what you did to All Might. Stain choked out. Izuku straightened. The hero killer had lost a lot of BLD. He was getting slower and more disoriented the longer the fight wore on. The hero killer was much better at quick battles that allowed him to draw BLD early on. He could feel the conviction in Stain's aura, but he barely paid it any mind. He'd felt more murderous intent from Katsuki on a good day. Izuku slowly sauntered forward, and when Stain raised his knife to stab him, he simply knocked his blade out of the way. Thanks for the fight, Stain, he said. It's been a nice challenge. He won. Izuku breaths out alone. Manuel looked up from the fire he was putting out when he heard his intern's voice. Ida, where have you been? He took in the BLD staining the white armor, the missing helmet, the tear streaks, and the way his intern was limping. What happened to you? Kudos for not swearing in that situation. Oxhoffs, the hero killer. Ida choked out and Manuel felt sick. To know where he is. He's fighting Mastermind in an alley a few blocks away. Two couldn't fight him, he was going to kill me. Native's still there. He's paralyzed with Stain's quirk. All things considered, not a bad rundown. Mirko concedes. Come on, Ida, Manuel said, let's get you to an ambulance. No, Ida cried, you have to catch the hero killer. You have to save Native. Did you say the hero killer? Manuel and Ida flinched as Endeavor came up behind them. Ida nodded, I know where he is. Lead the way, boy. Endeavor said, and Ida started running with Endeavor and Manuel close behind. Shudo Todoroki watched them leave from his place among the sidekicks. Ida looked like he was lucky to have survived. He shook his head and focused on sending ice toward some of the fires. Maybe he should have told someone his suspicions about Ida after all. But he thought at least the hate in his eyes is gone. Small victories. Koda nods. Right down here, Ida called, then stopped short when he saw the BLD. Some of it was his, he knew, but there was a lot more of it than had been on the ground when he left. Endeavor went to Stain, who was lying on the ground, his red scarf blending into its surroundings. Graphic. Ishido shivers. Surrender, villain, you cannot escape. When Stain didn't move, he bent down, keeping one hand on fire just in case. He checked the villain's pulse and swore, extinguishing the light in his hand. He looked so disappointed. Todoroki smiles softly. Meanwhile, Manuel had gone to help Native. Ida went over to help him, but Manuel just shook his head. I'm sorry, Ida. It looks like he bled out sometime during the fight. Ida stared at the fallen hero in horror as Manuel put his arm around him and led him out of the alley. Come on, he said softly, let's get you to the hospital. At least almost getting arrested saved someone's life. Izuku comforts. Yes, there is that. Ida nods, taking deep breaths. Okay, let's just watch the next chapter, maybe good things will happen. Uraraka suggests. Yeah, we gotta see what Viridian's up to. May agrees. It's starting. Shinso warns. Now playing Viridian. The Green Guide research. Izuku had spent the entire day so far researching online schools while Mom was at work. She tried to stay home, but she'd had to leave early yesterday because Izuku was too useless to stay out of trouble. So Izuku wasn't about to make her miss work again, just so he wouldn't be alone. Thankfully, she'd listened when he pointed out that he wouldn't be doing anything besides sitting on the couch all day, which he didn't need two arms for anyway, and she'd left after she made him promise to keep the door locked. He was just happy that he wasn't holding her back. I get his point, but leaving someone alone when they're sick or injured is awful. Uraraka pouts. In any case, if he was able to transfer to online school, he'd have to get used to being home alone during the day, since Mom obviously couldn't afford to quit her job. There weren't that many online schools, and those that did exist were mostly some sort of mixed format where students still had to show up once a week. That would probably be better than going back to Aldera, since he would only have to deal with bullies occasionally rather than every day, but something told him Mom wouldn't see it that way. Neither do we. Midnight agrees. The whole point of him going to an online school was so that he wouldn't have to deal with having classmates, so if he still had to attend classes, even infrequently, Mom would worry about how he was being treated. Izuku hated it when Mom had to worry about him. She didn't deserve to have a garbage son like him, she deserved a son she could be proud of, a son with a quirk. And he doesn't care about any of that. Bakugo growls. But that wasn't going to happen, so it was Izuku's responsibility to make sure she worried as little as possible. That meant that he couldn't just put up with weekly bullying, since Mom might not believe him if he lied and said his classmates were being nice. That left him to find a school that was entirely online. There were only 2 schools that did not require in-person attendance. One of them seemed almost like a traditional school, where students showed up in video chat classrooms at set times and turned in homework every day just like Izuku was used to at Aldera. There were 2 problems with that school, however. The first was that it seemed to include group projects, which might lead to Izuku being left out at best and cyberbullied at worst. The second was that it only accepted new students at the beginning of the semester, which meant that Izuku would have to stay at Aldera for several months until he was able to transfer. He couldn't do that to Mom. Perhaps I should design a fully online school myself. Nedza starts writing out plans in his notebook. That left Izuku with his final and only option. It apparently had options for everything from grade school until the end of high school and was entirely remote. According to their website, Izuku would just read articles and watch lectures associated with each lesson, then take tests and do assignments to test his learning. He would be able to work at his own pace so he wouldn't have to worry about how stupid he was, he could just go slower than average. He did have to complete each semester class within 6 months, but that sounded like something he could handle. And Mom wouldn't have to worry about him having classmates that would bully him. Aside from the fact that you are smart, that's perfect. Kaminari cheers. There was only one problem. He would have to pass an entrance exam. He could take it at any time so he wouldn't have to worry about going back to Aldera while he waited for the new semester to start. But was Izuku really smart enough to pass? Kaken didn't even get straight A's and he was so much smarter than Izuku. What if he took the test and didn't pass? Would he have to go back to Aldera? Mom would be so disappointed. He really was the worst son, wasn't he? No, you're great, it'll be fine. He ignored the voice in his head that said that Eraserhead thought he was smart. Eraser had just been being polite when he saw Izuku's notebook. There was no way he actually thought Izuku was intelligent. But Eraser wasn't worried about being polite, so he could be telling the truth. Izuku shook his head. That was too confusing. It was just easier to firmly remind himself that he was an idiot just like Kaken and his teachers always said, and leave it at that. That way he wouldn't get his hopes up. When he inevitably failed the entrance exam, it would still hurt and Mom would still be worried, but at least he would already be expecting it. It was for the best. Who would have thought the golden boy could be such a defeatist? Dabi asked. Well, we've only seen him on the battlefield, so it's not like we know him. Toga chirps. Katsuki felt sick. The entire school was talking about how Deku got suspended. Boulders had been bragging about it all day, as had the other 2 extras that had been involved. So everyone already knew how Deku had been beaten up so badly that the principal had to call Auntie Inko to come to pick him up. Glow had said it was his idea to pin the whole thing on Deku like he was proud of his creative thinking, and the principal had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. The FCK, the quirkist BSTRD, did. Bakugo growls. That school was really on that toxic bullshit. Kirishima huffs. It still is. Zero size. Not for long. Kaminari and Ishido chorus, glancing at their principal. But Deku couldn't have started that fight. Katsuki knew that, Auntie Inko knew that, and the principal sure as hell knew that. So why had the school gone along with Glow's story? Deku was a quirkless weakling who couldn't even defend himself, so why would he start a fight with his classmates? Sure, those extras didn't have awesome quirks like Katsuki's, but their weak-ass quirks were better than nothing, and Deku had those stalker notebooks and he obviously knew he couldn't win, and even he wasn't stupid enough to pick a fight, so what did the school get from blaming Deku? Their reputation. Maruko spits out. Well, those 3 extras who had beaten him up had gotten off scot-free. But it shouldn't matter to the school who got the punishment, right? They should be punishing those who were actually at fault so that they knew they did something wrong. That's what heroes did, at least. They put the bad guys in prison so they wouldn't do anything bad in the future even after they got out. Wasn't that the way things worked? That's how it's supposed to work. Aizawa nods. If the principal was letting these guys get away with what they did, then who else had he let get away with stuff? Were there villains out there who were out beating people up because the school hadn't done anything to stop them back when they went here? That was kinda messed up. It was a good thing that Katsuki knew better than to. Katsuki froze. You can practically see the light bulb SWCH on. Kaminari grins. How much had he gotten away with? He had already had to come to terms with the fact that he hadn't been acting like a hero, but he hadn't been acting like a villain, right? The teachers all knew he wanted to be a hero. They all told him he'd be a good one. They wouldn't just do nothing if he'd been acting like a villain. Not when they all knew he was going to be the next #1. He's figuring it out. Ajaru sighs with a bit of relief. But he'd hurt Deku, and it was villains who hurt people. Not heroes. Not civilians. Villains. Villains hurt people. He hurt people. He was a villain. He really should have joined us. Shigaraki grumbles. Katsuki couldn't keep himself from exploding his pencil, but the only reprimand he got was a stern look from the teacher for interrupting class. Katsuki couldn't help but wonder what would have happened to Deku if he'd done something like that, obviously not exploding his pencil because he didn't have a quirk to do that, but if he'd been loud, he'd probably have gotten detention at the very least. Maybe if the teacher was having a good day. Izuku grumbles. Why had no one ever given him detention? The school hadn't even done anything when he'd told Deku to Katsuki crushed the charred remains of the pencil. The teachers heard those extras telling Deku to kill himself every DMN day, but they still didn't do anything. How long had Katsuki been a villain without realizing it? Since that first time you made him cry on purpose. Bakugo grit his teeth. He couldn't trust his teachers, not anymore. How was he supposed to be the best if they wouldn't even tell him what he was doing wrong? He had to be better. He had to change and actually act like a hero if he was ever going to be the best, and he was going to be the best. He was going to be the best hero, no matter what stupid challenges got in his way, no matter how much he had to change, no matter if those stupid teachers couldn't be bothered to do their F-King jobs. Katsuki was going to be the best, but how? Check your local community center. They got all sorts of weird May claims. Aldera doesn't do community stuff, so I didn't even know we had a center until after I got into UA. Izuku informs. Are you sure Aldera is an accredited institution? Ida asks. Hell if I know how. Jun Hamasaki woke up chained to a table. Immediately he started pulling at the chains and even tried cutting them with his claws, but without any trigger in his system, there was no way he'd be getting out. What happened? He'd been at the police station, then there had been alarms and that detective had left alongside the hero who arrested him, then another officer had come in and opened a tiny bottle with a single mechanical. We get to see what happens to Crab Guy. Toga grins. He groaned. He knew the symbol of evil, whoever he was powerful enough to have some dirty cops on his side. He should have known that they wouldn't leave him in police custody. He knew too much. It probably didn't even matter that he'd said anything, they still would have dragged him back here anyway. He's right. Shigaraki says simply. Speaking of, where exactly was here? It would have been easier to just kill him, inject him with poison rather than a sedative, but instead they'd kept him alive. Well, as long as this wasn't the place they did their experiments, he'd be fine. Congratulations, you jinxed yourself. Dabi chuckles. The door creaked open and Jun craned his neck to try and get a better look at either the room or his visitor, but unfortunately, aside from a bright lamp over his head, the rest of the room was dark. There was some shuffling in the general direction of the door, then he heard a high-pitched squeaking that set his teeth on edge, almost like someone had forgotten to oil the wheels on one of those old metal wagons. The comparison wasn't too far off, apparently, because his visitor finally stepped into the light pushing an old metal cart loaded with a variety of tools and bottles that Jun didn't want to know the uses of. His BLD ran cold as he realized the man was wearing large round glasses and a lab coat. The doctor. Izuku gaped at the screen. It can't be. The doctor took a voice recorder from his pocket and pressed a button. Phase 3 Experiment 2. Hypothesis. Through a combination of mutation and trigger, an elevated quirk level can be achieved even after the drag is out of the system. Please don't do this. Jun didn't care that pulling at the chains hadn't worked before. He couldn't be turned into it. Didn't matter if none of the others remembered the actual experimentation. He didn't want taught his couldn't be happening. The doctor didn't seem to care about his pleas, though, since he picked up a thick syringe off the cart and moved to stand over the table, the light reflecting off his thick round glasses so Jun couldn't see his eyes. Time of first injection. 8:24 p.m. Human experimentation? Fun. Viridian needs to stay out of it. But he won't. Do you think Crab Guy will survive? The only way to know is to watch. Now playing cheat code. Support strategist abduction. Izuku leaned back in his seat after finishing up the list of theories he'd been working on. He'd spent the morning reviewing the videos he had of the hero students and making rough lists of potential ideas for improvement that he could clean up once he'd seen their quirks in action more, but for now there wasn't much else he could do on that project, which meant that it was time for extra credit. Kuan. Oh god, May really was starting to rub off on him, wasn't she? You know what, May cackles. Izuku shook his head with a chuckle as he grabbed the notebook he'd dedicated to their extra credit project and opened Shinso's file, only to realize that he was at a dead end there as well. At least with the hero students, he had some combat videos to analyze, but all Izuku had for Shinso was his student file and the video of his entrance exam, which obviously didn't show the full potential of his quirk because he couldn't use it on robots. If Izuku wanted his analysis to be of any use to Shinso at all, he needed more information. The easiest way to get that information would be to simply ask and hope that Shinso wouldn't be too creeped out to answer him. Well, even if he was creeped out, he'd probably still answer if Izuku explained that it was to help him do better in the sports festival. Anyway, it didn't really even matter because he was probably in class right now, but it wouldn't hurt to check, right? If you catch his free PRD, you could drag him out of class. Uraraka suggests. Yes, because I'm not enough of a social pariah, the weird support kid taking me out of class will be fine. Shinso says, voice dripping with sarcasm. Gee thanks. Izuku snarks. Anytime. Hitoshi grins. Before he could second-guess himself, Izuku opened up the class schedule for Class 1C. Even if Shinso was in class, which he should be, it would still be helpful to know his schedule so he and Mei could track him down later. Thank God those stalker vibes are on our side. Shinso smirks. Izuku retaliates by throwing popcorn in the boy's hair, much to Ida's dismay. Speaking of Mei, she chose that moment to burst through the door to Izuku's workroom without knocking. She didn't even wait for him to look up before she draped herself over his shoulders, groaning dramatically, Izuku-kun, help, I can't make Shinso's babies. Dabi coughed. I forgot she talked like that for a second there. I think it's funny. Toga giggles. I never said it wasn't. Dabi chuckles back. Izuku snorted. Most girls have to actually meet a guy before creating his children. Naughty boy Midnight grins. Mei grabbed his shoulder and spun his chair around so he was facing her and could see the manic grin that had just spread across her face. That's a brilliant idea. Izuku smiled and shook his head fondly. Let me guess, you need more info on his quirk and fighting style before you can really get started? Well, Mei dismisses. Yep. Mei picked an empty spot on Izuku's desk and sat down. You too? Izuku nodded and turned back to his screen. I was just looking up his schedule to see when the best time to meet him would be. Well, make it ASAP, Mei said impatiently. I want to start making babies, Mei. Majima whines. You can't just rush these things, Mei-chan, it isn't polite. Izuku told her patiently. We can't just take him out of class, or maybe we can. Free PRD. Uraraka teases. Mei jumped off the desk and leaned over her shoulder. Wait, what is it? He has a study PRD right now. Izuku pointed to the screen. If we got Powerloader's permission, we could probably pull him out of class for a few minutes, since he wouldn't actually be missing any lessons. At least he's being considerate. Majima groans. Let's do it. Mei hugged him tightly before pulling him to his feet and pushing him toward the door. What are you waiting for? I have babies to make. Their classmates glanced up at Mei's declaration as the door opened, but they spared the two less than a second before shaking their heads and going back to work on their own projects. Izuku still thought it was a little weird how quickly the class had seemed to just accept their antics, but he wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. He had Mei and that was enough for him right now. He'd probably just managed to work himself into an anxiety attack if he tried to second-guess every interaction he'd had with his classmates looking for ways that they actually hated him, and honestly he was too busy with his analysis projects to have any time for that right now. The problem child is going to struggle with overworking himself his whole career. Aizawa sighs. Then it's good he has such dedicated friends to lean on. Mike comforts. It didn't take them long at all to reach Powerloader's desk, especially not with Mei still pushing him in her excitement. Powerloader simply sighed and looked at them as they approached. Should I be concerned about what you two are cooking up? No, Izuku said at the same time that Mei shouted. Yes, Mei. Izuku cries in exasperation. I know I'm a disaster. You're still learning, Mei defends. Unfortunately, Mei's voice was just a little louder. We just want to ask Shinso some questions about his quirk, Izuku said quickly. I looked and he has a study PRD right now, so we were hoping we could borrow him and bring him here. We'd use my workroom so we wouldn't bother the other students. Please? He's so polite. Toga coos. Izuku had learned his puppy dog eyes from his mom, and honestly he wasn't even aware that he was doing them until he caught Mei mimicking his expression out of the corner of his eye. Powerloader simply looked at them tiredly for a long moment before caving. Midoriya, you go and get him. I'm not sure I trust Mei not to blow something up between here and there. Come on, it's not like there are that many explosive things between here and the general education department, Mei exclaimed. Just the wiring and probably the fire extinguishers if you count foam as an explosion. Oh, and the security system. Izuku-kun, do you know if there are any bombs in the security system? Case in point, Karo. Sue smiled. Yeah, it's probably for the best if I just go, Izuku said, ignoring the way Mei pouted at him as he turned back to Powerloader. Could I have a note explaining the situation in case Shinso's teacher asks why I need him? I know. Mike grinned. Present Mike should already be expecting you, Powerloader said tiredly. I mentioned your little project to the other teachers and warned him that it was only a matter of time before you dropped by. Izuku didn't know if it was good or bad that the entire faculty knew about their plans to help Shinso. Honestly, he'd never had teachers care about what he wanted to do before, so this was all new territory. That's good then. Powerloader nodded. Get back quick before Hatsum blows up our lab again. Mei cackled and ran back toward her desk. Good luck, ask for the impossible. Shinso teased. Hitoshi tapped his pencil idly on his notebook as he reviewed English verb structure for the third time. Not that having a second language wouldn't be useful, but he couldn't help thinking that the hero students were probably training right now and getting more and more of an unfair advantage every minute that Hitoshi spent studying academics. There was only so long until the sports festival and his last chance to get into the hero course, so he didn't want to waste any time. Just wait. Jiro smirked. The silence of the classroom was interrupted by a quiet knocking on the door, and a tiny-looking kid with tangled green curls and large eyes poked his head in. Present mic, sir? Would it be alright if I borrowed Shinso for a few minutes? Hitoshi froze as his entire class swiveled in their seats to look at him curiously, as if he had any idea why a kid he'd never seen before in his life was interrupting his class and asking for him by name. He's so confused. HeadcaseKiller giggles. His classmate's curiosity was almost palpable as Mick Sensei looked up from his desk and gave the boy a mischievous smile. You're one of Powerloader's gremlins, right? It's bad enough you call them that, but right to his face? Majima questioned. Mike just shrugged. The kid sputtered for a moment at Mick's wording before apparently giving up on being embarrassed and letting out a sigh as he walked fully into the room. Yes, sir. He said that he mentioned things to you. Of course, Mike grinned. Shinso, go ahead and grab your things. There's no guarantee you'll be back by the end of class. As Hitoshi hurried to comply, Mike turned back to the kid. Try to return him in one piece, you dig? Ominous. Shinso joked. Hitoshi's eyes widened and he felt himself pale slightly as the kid returned Mick's smile with a small one of his own. No guarantees. I'm not the one you need to worry about, but also I'm not responsible for anything Mei-chan does when she's excited. Oh, Mike laughed. I can see why Nedza likes you so much. The class erupted into whispers and Hitoshi was starting to wonder if he would have a better chance of surviving if he just jumped out the window. Mick Sensei wouldn't actually let this mystery kid, or whoever this Mei-chan person was, hurt him, right? Oh Shinso, you look mildly terrified. Uraraka teases. Wouldn't you? Shinso raises an eyebrow. Uraraka just snickers. Hitoshi finished packing his backpack and gulped as the kid smiled at him. Normally, a bright smile like that would put him more at ease, but after hearing the kid basically plot his murder, it just looked vaguely terrifying. Reluctantly, Hitoshi followed his kidnapper? Was that what the kid was? What was even happening? Dabi snickers. That kid has no idea what to do. His kidnapper didn't say anything as he led Hitoshi down the hallway to a part of the school he didn't recognize, not that that was helpful at all, considering that he'd been at UA for less than a week. He had no idea what was happening anymore, and honestly he was too afraid to ask. All he knew was that this kid might kill him and his teacher wouldn't even care. So much for the teachers at UA being different. Hey, Mike frowns. His kidnapper still didn't break the silence, and as they got even more lost in the maze that was UA, Shinso eventually got fed up and decided that if he was going to get murdered anyway, it wouldn't hurt to at least ask this kid why he'd kidnapped him. At worst, he'd just get killed a little sooner, right? Shinso no. Izuku tsutsuklas. Shinso yes. The boy smirks. Hitoshi's voice sounded too loud and he had to take a step back as the kid pinned him with those wide eyes, giving Hitoshi a strange sense that this kid knew everything about him and was simply dissecting him with his gaze. I have a few questions. The kid smiled brightly again. Of course I might not be able to give the best answers, but I'll try. He is too smart to have this much doubt. Jiro sighs. Hitoshi took a breath. Who are you? Where are we going? Why did you just kidnap me? Finally, who is Mei-chan and should I be writing my will? Snort. Ha ha ha. Oh my god, this kid. Fair reaction. The kid looked at him in shock for a long moment before he started giggling uncontrollably. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry I didn't, and I completely forgot to introduce myself. So no wonder Yurian present Mike called me a gremlin, which probably didn't help anything. This is probably why our classmates are terrified of us, huh? You think? Shinso deadpants. Probably. Shinso said, not because he knew this kid's classmates, but more because he didn't really have any other response to that. So, alright. The kid jumped slightly and started walking into the labyrinth that was UA again. My name is Izuku Midoriya and we're heading back to my classroom. Mei-chan is my best friend. She probably won't hurt you, she just gets really excited about her inventions and they don't always work the first time, which isn't that bad. You just need to be a little careful in case they explode unexpectedly. We're support students obviously since Mei-chan has inventions to explode. And what else? Still didn't tell him the why? Dabi snarks. Oddly enough, Midoriya's rambling was actually calming and made him seem less like some mysterious psychopath, so Hitoshi actually found himself feeling a little more at ease as he seeked an eyebrow. Why you kidnapped me? Midoriya furrowed his forehead as his voice dropped to a mutter. I didn't do which why would well, I guess I did kind of steal you away unexpectedly, but that wasn't. Midoriya. Hitoshi interrupted the kid's mutter storm and gestured for him to continue. Why did you kidnap me? Midoriya chuckled awkwardly and rubbed the back of his neck. I don't want to get into too much detail without Mei-chan here, but basically we're going to get you into the hero course. What? As the screen fades out, the crowd whines at not seeing Shinso meet Hatsum and the start of his training. The grumbling only ends when the next chapter begins. Now playing.